Senate chamber. Signed. 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 Senate chamber. Sound. 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 Senate chamber. Sound.
Of the public into the room. Barbara, you can invite people in there if you want. She didn't hear me, she's so focused on that thing.
I don't think sure.
Yeah, page 30.
All right, looks after us very well, Barbara. Okay, members, welcome to the 30th meeting of the Public Accounts Committee. Can advise that the meeting will be recorded and broadcast through Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a slight delay in moving between a private and public session, so please be patient with the system. Can I also advise anyone who will be joining us in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. They can also connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi, and the password is in the gallery rules. It is not permitted at any time to take any photographs or record any part of this meeting. And I welcome also to committee today Peter Hall, who has kindly stepped in to provide clerking support to us today, and also thank Kirsten and the committee team for the work that they're doing to support us. We have apologies today from Cathal Boylan, MLA, and Cheryl Brownlee, our Vice Chairperson, who unfortunately cannot be with us. And we have everything else, yeah. Okay, here's business, fine. Okay, members, we'll move on to agenda item 3, is draft minutes. Can I refer members to the pack for a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January, page 6 of the pack. And if members would consider and agree those minutes if accurate.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, members, can I ask, has anyone any relevant declaration of interest to declare for this particular meeting? Okay, members, moving on. Agenda item 4 is the inquiry into developing the skills for Northern Ireland's future evidence session. Can I welcome to the meeting Blanad Gervin, the Youth Assembly member, Harrison Kerr, Youth Assembly member, Mr. Rory Brown, Youth Assembly member, Ms. Paige Brennan, Youth Assembly member, and Dorina Carville, our Controller and Auditor General, who will be joining us, and Stuart Stevenson, hopefully, who will be joining us shortly as well. Can I also welcome the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly staff team, Lucy, Claire and Ren, and thank them for facilitating the session today. It's greatly appreciated. All smiles down there. It's good. Can I also refer members to the relevant papers relating to this agenda item, which you'll find at pages 14 to 27 of the main pack. Blanad, Harrison, Rory and Paige, you're very welcome to the Public Accounts Committee. We've been looking forward to seeing you and meeting with you and engaging with you. But more importantly, you being here with us and sharing some of your questions with us, which we're very happy to take. So don't be afraid as well when we raise questions to you to challenge us a wee bit as well. Okay? So we'll open the... Can I invite you to present your report? So in whatever way you have that arranged, and if members have any questions for our Youth Assembly, please indicate and we'll move accordingly with that said. So I'll open it to yourselves, and we're all ready.
Hello everyone, my name is Blanet and thank you for having us today. I'm going to begin by giving you some brief background about the Youth Assembly, and the other members are going to talk about access to qualifications, careers guidance, academic and vocational skills, and skills with collaborative practice. So, the Youth Assembly is a diverse group of 90 young people from the ages 13 to 17. We are from every constituency and represent Section 75 categories. In the Youth Assembly, we perform three things: to engage with the Northern Ireland Assembly, specifically with Assembly committees on legislation and inquiries relevant to young people; to undertake project work generated by the three Youth Assembly committees, and enable consultation with government departments to participate in Youth Voice projects. As Youth Assembly members, we are very grateful that we received a briefing from the Public Account Committee staff, and we like to give a special thanks to Deputy Chair Shell Bromley, MLA, and other committee staff for meeting with the Youth Assembly members, during which Youth Assembly members gave our views via a Mentimeter survey, which can be found in members' packs. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rory, and today I'm talking about access to qualification and the Youth Assembly's thoughts on that. Most members stated that they were offered a wide range of qualifications at their school. However, an issue was taken with some schools' attitude toward university and it being seen as the default option and tech as a last resort. Students also said they were required to achieve certain number of points or grades in order to stay on for their next year of GCSEs or to come back after AS levels. We feel as if this may affect the choices they are likely to make. One member who attended an all-abilities school said members had a wide range of qualification opportunities. Members said they would like more options at GCSE, such as PE and politics, and other subjects that might not be traditionally taught. Some stated that they feel limited by the number of required subjects that take up valuable slots on a timetable, and would like more access to vocational subjects. Now I will pass it on to my fellow member, Harrison.
Hello, my name is Harrison, and just moving on to address careers guidance in schools. Overall, members' experiences were mostly positive. The advice provided by schools was generally useful, although as Roy said, there was a great emphasis on the A-levels and uni pathway. Members had opportunities to meet with a range of adults to discuss their futures in schools. You can find more information on this in your packs, although it was noted that more personalised advice that could take into account every student's specific situation and individual strengths would be appreciated. For example, we think that one-on-one meetings in particular would facilitate this. In particular, my fellow member Blonid also said that as a young carer, she would like advice on how to manage her own unique responsibilities and plan for her own career. Previously, the Youth Assembly also engaged with Syrian Youth Voice, and some of them also described how they struggled as newcomers to Northern Ireland, managing the transition and understanding our academic system, and how they would like some more support from their schools on this. Members also reported a problem with consistency of delivery of careers advice. It can vary greatly across schools, and some students may be disadvantaged in the future as a result. Another few important points that we would like to raise: members would like opportunities to find out more about careers through guided research and work experience, which we're going to discuss more in detail later. They would value advice and counsel from former students and more information on study opportunities abroad. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Paige and I'll be touching on a range of points, beginning with academic versus vocational qualifications. So the vast majority of members stated that the academic and vocational qualifications are not equally promoted or valued. members felt that they were expected to continue on to sixth form and that only academic subjects were available. They also said that apprenticeships were undervalued and, a quote, only seen as an option for if you're struggling with academics. Also, some members reported that their teachers encouraged pupils to take their subject, even if it might not suit the pupil. And teachers said, some members said that their teachers stated that they didn't want their timetable being filled with learning for life and work lessons. One member reported that teachers in some subjects were more open to vocational routes. Moving on to skills needed in Northern Ireland. Most members are not aware of the skills needed in Northern Ireland, and we held a discussion following the survey about the importance of the following areas, such as STEM, ICT, etc. Members were also equally split on whether the current curriculum aligns with these areas, and we also believe that the Department of Education and the Department of Economy should work closely together so schools are able to meet our economic needs. Moving on to collaborative practices and duplication. Members were split on the question of the collaborative practices, and they suggested that it was more common in non-selective post-primary schools than grammar. They are aware of some examples of duplication, citing schools which offer vocational courses, which are also offered at the local FE college. I'd like to finish with comments with 2 more points regarding work experience and the beginning careers journey earlier. Views on work experience came through in our discussion, and some members stated that was becoming less common because schools can't afford insurance required for pupils. They agreed that work experience is an important part in exploring future careers. Members also feel that careers education must begin earlier in the school journey and that there should be better links between schools, local businesses and FE colleges. Thank you very much. We're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Those presentations were excellent and very detailed. The 4 of you are exceptional communicators, by the way, so well done in providing us with that presentation and your insights into where the gaps are, where the challenges are, where the frustrations are, and where the opportunities are as well. I want to pick up on the work experience part first of all before I open up to members. Paige, all of you touched on the experience element, but getting that experience earlier in the school, in your education journey at school, do you feel that is critical in terms of shaping the idea as to what you want to do? So, you know, me personally, I think back, I wanted to be fly planes at a time, a pilot. I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I wanted to be a solicitor.
We wish you'd
I don't ask how I've ended up as a politician, but I am now a politician, which is far away from flying planes, a bit like being a psychiatrist is, and does deal with some of the legal parts. So maybe I've got a bit of an all-encompassing role. So I felt when I was going through school that I didn't have the best possible advice and guidance in relation to work experience. Some would say that's clear, but so what is your experience of that? Do you think that it happens early enough? Should it happen sooner? And how good, I know one of you, I think Harrison, you mentioned the one-on-one element of it. How do you think that would improve shaping what you'd like to do in the future?
Well, me personally, so next week I'll be picking my A-levels, and I've had no work experience, and I think on the meeting we had, someone did mention that I think maybe one of our youth assembly workers, they stated that they might have wanted to become, as you said, like a solicitor or lawyer, but when they did go off on their work experience, they realised that they didn't want to do it. Whereas many when coming to picking a career, people might have this different idea of what that entails and might go on to study that and then realise they don't like it. Whereas through work experience, we'll be able to see that earlier and be able to make a good decision on what career we want to go through, because we now know what that is like.
Yeah, you for that. So if you haven't had, not you personally, but if a student hasn't had work experience and has this idea, say, of what it is to be a solicitor. So, you know, originally I thought you go to court, you fight for somebody, that all sounds good, but what people don't realise, and what I certainly didn't realise, is behind the scenes there's a mountain of paperwork, endless days in the office. It's not a 9 to 5 job. You're on call 7 days a week. So I changed my course on that, and I'm still on call 7 days a week. But
You do all those things?
and I do all those things as well. So do you think that this is having a knock-on effect to people then pursuing a course at university or A-level and then university in that direction, and by the time they get there and realise what it's about, they go, oh my God, I've spent the last number of years doing all of this and it's not for me, it's not a right fit?
Yeah, I believe that, because many, as you know, university can be very, very expensive, and people might go down that route and realise that they don't like it, yet have all this university fees to pay for something that they don't even like doing. So having that work experience, they'll be able to make an informed decision without having a whole load of money to pay, and so, all that time being taken away, and be able and having to go and restudy a new thing that they wasted that time on.
Is it right to say that schools need to do more to provide those opportunities for greater work experience at an earlier stage?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I can pick
Yes.
up on that a second, I would say definitely, especially with the rise of online meetings and such becoming more popular. I don't think that it can be afforded to forget about in-person work experience, actually being there, seeing beside the person who's doing what you might want to do in the future. I would say work experience has slowly started to move online. In some, obviously, there are different career areas in which this is less relevant, but that is definitely a problem. From my personal experience in school, my careers department is very good with passing on the information, but they don't really engage directly with whatever organisation is providing the work experience themselves. They kind of just direct you to a website or whatever, and it is up to you to reach out to them personally.
Just a final question for me, and I may have others later, but so you're at this point in your educational journey and you'll be moving to the next chapter, but someone had mentioned the cost of tuition fees or attending university, and they've increased significantly since I've been at university. Is that now a deciding factor in determining whether you will or will not pursue a course that you want, what you will enjoy and ultimately will need for a future reason, or does it not feature at all? So is the cost of tuition at university affecting your decisions in relation to what route you take?
For me, I think, yeah, because in our careers class, which is like only a half an hour a week, we do look at different courses, and we are encouraged to look at the fees. And when you see those fees are so high, it really turns you off, because you're also questioning how are you going to pay them while also having to work a part-time job along with studying in university. So it does put you off a bit.
Can I jump in there as well,
Yes,
please?
of course.
So I'm a young carer, and for me, I can't really get a part-time job because I'm caring. I'm helping my family care for my sister. So for me, like, it definitely does. Because if I was looking at a course and I was like totally in love with it, but it was 6 years long and it was 5,000 per year plus accommodation, it would turn me off straight away, because there would be no way for me to get that money to go do that course that I really, really want to do.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. We'll open to the floor. Diane Forsyth.
Yep, thank you, and thank you all very much for coming here today. And my colleague Cheryl Brownlee said she had a fantastic session with you, and she apologises for not being here, but great feedback from her. Just to build on what you said before about how, without work experience, people have an idea of what things are and how we can try to make the experience better for you who are living this at the minute. I know for me, whenever I was coming through, I went on to study law, and I was quite inspired by the idea of what it would be, and I'm not going to lie, it was based on Legally Blonde, the movie, and I like the idea of, I did well at school, I like the idea of going in and proving everyone wrong that you can be a good, strong, smart woman and do well and still dress the part. So that was very much, in keeping with my thinking. So whenever I was at university, that's when I started to do work experience. And I didn't like it in a solicitor's office, and I didn't like it in the halls of the bar. But the issue actually then was a law degree is a fantastic degree because it develops these particular skills for drafting legislation, analysing legislation, speed reading, all these types of skills. And then I went on postgrad to train to be an accountant. And then working on different things, I think that those skills assist you in doing that. And then I'm back here now as an MLA, involved with writing legislation. So the skill base actually went with me. But this particular report and this inquiry that we're doing is about the skills needs. And some of them, your feedback was that people weren't aware of things in terms of skills. It's very much what job do you want to do, not what skills can we build on. What do you think we could do in the schools to try to make it more about the skills and not say, what job do you want to do, rather than shape it with the skills?
I would definitely say my earlier point that one-on-one careers interviews that are tailored to the individual's particular strengths and interests, because after all, as well, I think teachers, if they've been teaching you for quite a few years, then they will get to know your strengths and your weaknesses, what you like doing and what you don't like doing. And obviously you're going to bring your own opinions to a careers meeting, but it would also be great for teachers to kind of explain to you what might be, because some people have an idea right away what they're going to do, but some people don't. And I would definitely say that having some more teacher guidance and suggestions, that communication with a careers advisor over the year rather than just a one meeting before you make your choices, would make people more aware of the skills that are needed in Northern Ireland and the kind of jobs that would be suited to them personally.
Could I also just say about that? I sort of feel like that would be a very necessary improvement about getting more personalised for each student. It felt as if for me when I went in for my careers interview to decide on my GCSEs, like it felt like they had received very little information about what I was good at, what I was bad at, and it was all, we'll figure that out in the very limited 10 minutes we have with you. And there was more of a focus on the actual results of like academics rather than say practical skills, for example. So there was no indication whether I was good at practical skills. There was no indication whether I was good at memorizing, whether I was good at writing, that sort of thing. It was more they looked at a number and then decided everything based on that. It feels like I think careers teachers should be provided with more insightful sort of, I don't know what to call them, but sort of maybe not statistics, but that sort of thing about each student to sort of gain more of a idea of what sort of career they would like to go down.
Thank you. And just a wee small follow-up. Do you think it would be useful to have more people who are in jobs or positions that you maybe admire or aspire to come back and say, well, what did you study? How did you get there? What was your path? Because everybody's is very different. Everyone's got a very different, shape as to how they got there.
Well, to answer that, I know my school is hosting a careers day next week, and a whole load of organisations are coming in, and many schools are coming to our school to view them and also to get information of what that career entails. However, it seems a bit not pointless, but our A-level day of choices is the day before, so we're getting this advice on careers, yet picking our some of us will be picking our A-levels the day before, so we might get this crucial information yet pick the wrong A-levels to carry on with one of those careers that might interest us.
No, thank you very much. Really, really useful, and appreciate it, because we hear a lot from officials who are setting the policies, but I think it's so important to hear the lived experience from those that are in education at the minute. Thank you, Chair.
We'll come to Colin Gildernew, but just before we do, and not to single out any of your teachers in any way, shape or form, but I couldn't pretend to know everything about every possible career. So is the current model the best to ensure that you're equipped with the information you need to make the decisions about your future in terms of career, job, or opportunities generally? Good to be doing with. How do you answer that without saying you're a teacher? So basically, should people who have the experience be coming in and giving a range of options in each sector, as opposed to a teacher expecting to explain to you about finance, ICT, STEM, all these various things? Should it be specific to the experts to come in and provide like an open day for you at an earlier age to say, oh, I like that, and then you can go further into that area and question on it?
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right, I'll go first. I feel like I definitely had that issue, I think, where one teacher, the idea was of my skills approach was one teacher is all they could really manage to get, and they were given like ideas of what they could do each lesson, and they were basically, it was the best they could do was give you a bit of information in each sort of sector of job, and it felt like I wouldn't say it's my school's fault, but it did feel like there was quite a bit of pressure on that on the few teachers who only knew about maybe a couple sectors, but they had to then teach about these other things. Although over the years there were some sort of people who came in who were only sort of coming in to give us information on their line of work, and that was really helpful, that sort of thing. I feel like although it could be hard to cover a wide range of jobs and opportunities and stuff like that, I think bringing in people who are actually working and doing that currently, I feel like that would be the best approach, but I feel like it would be hard to achieve. Because it's more of a perfect world idea, I think, is having people coming in telling you what it's like to work in their position.
Okay, thank you. Colin?
Yep, thank you very much, Chair. And I suppose just to start out, to thank all of you for coming along and the facilitators. And I probably should have declared an interest at the start in relation to the fact that I have worked previously as an MLA with Blanid on that young carer specific issue a number of years ago, which will give you some idea of the calibre and commitment that Blanid brings. So I want to acknowledge that. Just to say as well, I have two boys myself, one just starting on GCSEs and one in his final year of A-levels, so I have a very personal awareness of the issues that we're discussing here. And just to say also to you, Blanid, your skills that you already have as a young carer, you should never minimise or underestimate. You will have very transferable skills around organising time, prioritising, all of those things that any employer would be very keen. So never neglect to mention that in any of your applications. Okay. So thanks to Blanid for setting out the role of the Youth Assembly, and as I have also should have maybe declared the interest that as Chair of Communities, I have worked with the Youth Assembly to inform us on the pensions bill, and I'm very well aware of the calibre of the work that they and their facilitators do in terms of engaging on these issues, preparing for them, and coming up with what is so important in terms of your experience, your knowledge, and your commitment and the impact all of these decisions have on your lives going forward. That's crucial that you are here involved in those conversations. Rory's contribution, and I've only one question I just want to touch, but Rory's contribution was very interesting as well, and in terms of you'd said about the ability to study PE and politics and other things. As you can see, I majored in politics more than the PE end of it, but I have to say your point is very well made. And I had the opportunity, for example, to study Latin, which is very useful across a range of languages, but I hear now more and more like even history and things being dropped off curriculums, and I think there's a real important part about studying what you want to study as well as studying for a career or a job. And I know we're focusing on the skills and the career end of it today. Paige's point, just to briefly touch, I think Paige made an excellent point there, and I think it's actually one that we should be considering further after this session around young people not being aware of the skills needed. That's a really fundamental and basic and easily enough addressed issue in terms of just providing pupils. If you're not aware of that, then how do you make those informed choices? So I think that's something that could easily enough be included as a recommendation and as part of our contribution. And my question then finally is around, and it's to all of you, but it's touched on the point that Harrison made around careers advice and how that's structured. So I'm wondering, we know that the universities and that are very frequently into schools and setting out their stall. Do you feel that you're hearing from enough of other opportunities and other pathways, such as the colleges, local colleges, directly from industry, directly from other business? Are they getting an opportunity to come into your schools and set out what a career path or what the skills they need, rather than sort of just a focus on academic achievement, as you've touched upon?
If I can just talk about that briefly, I would say from my experience at school, there has definitely been, in some elements, especially engineering, technology, we have had local organisations, local FE colleges coming in to explain to pupils that are interested about that and what future careers in that path could lead to. And we've also had former students who have pursued a range of professions, from medicine to IT to engineering. They have also been in, and that, I would say, that's definitely a key element of careers education, hearing the experiences of other people who have gone down that career path, the positives, what they've maybe regretted doing, and what they want to tell the people of the next generation of what they should be aware of before they go into this profession.
Thank you. Okay, David Honeyford.
Thank you. You've covered a lot of base, which is really useful. My kids are slightly older, and one's out of uni and at uni, and I find as a parent that the careers advice they got in the next bit when they were doing their A-levels was actually UCAS filling out form advice rather than actual careers advice. Not to take away from the teachers who were brilliant at that. So Daniel said a minute ago about how you would get that advice to you. Just to tease that out a little bit more, how would you want to hear that advice? A teacher obviously can't know everything, as Daniel said. How would you want to be that presented to you, and how do you make that even then across a range of skills?
Well, for me personally, about 2 weeks ago, I got a phone call with a careers advisor for 15 minutes. It was informative, but I believe a one-on-one interview for a lot longer would have been much better for me and feel much more personal, because while the careers call was good and I was able to give them my GCSEs, what sort of volunteering opportunities I was in and what I was interested to, it didn't feel as personal as I wanted it to, and it went quite quickly, so I wasn't able to get all my points out whilst listening to the careers advisor giving me advice to move on. So I definitely believe a longer, more detailed and in-person interview with a careers advisor, and maybe even someone from the school who knows me and knows what I'm good at would help a lot and help me figure out a good career suited for myself.
Could I also say about there, what you're saying, I felt in a way that some youth assembly members seem to allude that when they did have a careers meeting, it was more about filling out the form to get their GCSEs choices done, rather than what are you interested in, what sort of profession are you looking to go into, because of the short nature of the calls, which I felt was a big limiting factor in sort of exploring every sort of, well, maybe not every opportunity, but a variety of different opportunities.
I'm just going to very quickly say also about when careers education should begin and end. These careers meetings, I feel like, and other youth assembly members have commented as well, that careers education should begin earlier in the school journey, at the start of secondary school, and there should be more continuous, there should be regular meetings with a careers advisor, the same careers advisor, not someone who's just getting to know your situation, so that you can continue to consult on that with them on any problems or issues or opportunities that you'd like to know more about.
You could also do small groups of like people who maybe know each other or are interested in similar things, because then you can cover more people and say the stuff that they are all interested in, but then they can go and help with.
Two other really quick things. You mentioned work experience and being able to access. How do you access work experience? So if you're, how are you able to access what you would want to do?
We don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
We don't know if, and personally, I don't know if we do receive work experience or not. We do in my school. Some do mention doing work experience, but I don't know if the schools provided that for them or if they went off and did it themselves. And we have no clue on how to access that ourselves.
Okay. And then just finally, just something to pick up what you said about the fees and how am I going to pay this, and that's really concerning to listen to the young next generation, or the coming through the barrier to education then, or third level education. You've seen a barrier that you have. How do I pay this? So just by a couple of things that you've said, is your understanding, because this could be a communication thing, but is your understanding is it's £5,000 of fees, you have to pay that as well as live at the same time? Yeah. Okay. No.
Well,
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I know one of my aunts went to university, and I do know I'm aware that like student loans and or grants you can get. However, it is a continuous process. If you do get a loan, I think my aunt is around like 37, and she, I think, just has stopped paying her uni fees, and she has a quite high job, so she is able to provide that money and get it done quickly. Whereas some people might go to uni and have a lesser paying job and will be continuing paying that for an extended period of time, while continuing to pay, say, rent or mortgages along with other bills.
Thank you.
Do you know?
Thanks, sir. I can completely agree with you. I've just literally made my last payment in the last couple of months as a student, and I'm out of university 15 years, so I know exactly what it's like. Tom Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming before us today. It's great to see you young people here today and addressing the committee and speaking to us in such an informed way. With regards to careers, is the career choice wide enough? Is it broad enough? Does it cover all the areas that as young people you feel it should be covering, or do you see any gaps within it?
I would say that there are some areas which have a higher level of attention than others. Obviously, some big careers like medicine, for example, there's a lot more support available for them because a lot more students have obviously done that and they're able to retell their experiences. But I would say there probably are some, although I can't think of any off the top of my head at the moment, there definitely are some sectors that are not really addressed, particularly in grammar schools, I would say.
Yeah, to add to Harrison's point, I go to an all-girls grammar school, so I believe a whole load of STEM subjects would be put forward, and subjects like the arts or English or the languages would be almost neglected because the push for women to go into STEM is a strong push from grammar schools.
I also feel like there are certainly gaps, especially in sort of more artsy subjects or like art-based subjects. They're left to the side a bit. They are less prioritized, and things that would be to do with them aren't given much thought. For example, we're taught about multiple different types of doctors. We're taught about like the different levels of teachers and stuff like that, but we're never taught about what say artists actually do. We're never taught about how to get into that sort of thing. It's more focused, especially I think in grammar schools. It's more focused on the ones that are more academically based, sort of like medicine. It's like that sort of thing is more prioritized. So there are massive gaps, I would say.
Just to follow on from that, and you have really answered the second question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you feel it's balanced between academic and practical? And that is, for example, your academic, your solicitor, your doctor, whatever, basis against your plumber and your joiner, and the academic against the practical. Do you believe that's balanced, or is there more pressure, if you like, put on the academic side?
There's definitely more pressure put on the academic side. One of the examples you gave there, I didn't know what a joiner was until a couple of months ago because no one told me. Because it was sort of, it was assumed since I go to a grammar school that I would do something more academic. It's definitely not pushed or even mentioned, really, those sort of career paths.
Well, personally in my school, because I go to an all-ability school, both routes are equally pushed. We had option talks today, and it's always you can come and stay back, or you can go to here. And actually today in school, the school was talking about making bespoke plans for maybe those who didn't get their 6 GCSEs that they need to get in. They could have 4 or 5 and then repeat the ones they needed to do again and do an A-level. But both are like S or C and all are pushed just as equally as coming back is.
Yeah, well, some people are cut out for the academic side, some are more the practical side, and of course I'm a qualified joiner and a stone mason and all of that type of thing. I don't know why I ended up here, but there you are. So there is the opening, if you like, for the real practical side as well.
Thank you, Tom. Jack of all trades is really what you were saying there.
Master of none.
Colin Crawford. All right.
Thanks, Chair. And can I join with the rest to say thank you, genuinely. Thank you for your time here today. It has been absolutely been a pleasure to have you. Not only to have you, but to take time to listen to you. And hopefully, as a committee, to take on board what you have said. And hopefully we can go away and help you guys in the long run. Both my questions have been answered. That's the problem with going last. But the first question was just around the resources which would help you make those better informed choices, and Harrison touched on that. And then the second question, which has already been answered, was the introduction of careers advice or career support earlier on your school journey. So again, thank you for your time. I'm sure it's been not easy coming in front of us crowd, but it has been really beneficial, so thank you all so much.
Okay, Padraig Delargy and then Colin briefly. Padraig, can you hear us? Yeah. Padraig's coming on remotely, all the way from the northwest. If he can hear us now. Yeah. Padraig, can you hear us? There's no mic up there. Come you on ahead there briefly, and then we'll come back.
Which we follow up on, and I note several times we've referred back to the need for one-to-one advice more often and longer time within that advice. And is there a role for that to be potentially online at times if it would increase? Could that be done rather than physically one-to-one? Is there potential where we could look at a system whereby you would have access online on a more regular basis? Would that work for you, or does it need to be in person? Just want to check that.
Personally, I think that would be the same. I don't think there would be much, because like being stuff online, it's sort of just now we've all gotten used to it, and I don't think there'd be much difference in the quality.
Maybe a part of the solution to improving that end of things, just so I wanted to check for you, so got away on us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Padraig, can you hear us now? Your mic is not on. Maybe a glitch, yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation and taking our questions as well and answering them so well and being very open and honest about the experiences that you have all went through and ultimately where some of the gaps are. You know, all of us kind of had an idea when we're of an age of what we think we want to do, without being informed with proper information about what that actually means. And I fear that even so many years after I've left school, that still is indeed the case. The truth is, work experience is invaluable to give you a real insight into what it means to be a doctor, a solicitor, a joiner, a plumber, all of those things. And only when you actually see it in action will you understand if you want to do it or not. And minds change as time goes on. I had a number of interesting conversations over the last few years with an organisation called Speakers for Schools. Have you ever heard of them? Yeah, they're a very good organisation. You can get them on Google. And they have said that right now over half of state-educated students in schools and colleges like yours leave with no work experience. So they're an organisation that's focused on this particular issue. I find some of the conversations fascinating with them, and these are directly in line with what they've been telling me privately as an MLA, not through this committee. It is a major challenge. Equally as well, you know, when I reflect back, I think I wish someone had told me where the gaps were in Northern Ireland even, because if, for instance, all of us in this room said we want to be a solicitor, but there's no demand for solicitors, well, we're not all going to get jobs. But if someone said there's a huge need for engineers and ICT, or there's a lot of available opportunities in finance now, etc., that's where you would probably try and look at if you thought there was going to be an outcome that would benefit you and your future. Because I have found from a lot of people, even at my age now, they're saying that they wish they had been informed back then and probably wouldn't have taken the course that they did in direction or otherwise. Padraig has joined us just as I was kind of buying time there. So Padraig, I was keeping us Northwest people on side here. So if you can hear us and your mic, he's muted. We can't.
Yeah, Chair, that should be me now, is it?
Yeah, that's you.
Sorry about that. It wasn't giving me an option to either mute or go on there. So hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah. Well, look, thanks very much for your presentation, firstly. Really interesting, and a lot of the questions that I had intended to ask have been asked, as you can imagine, but fair play to you all for coming on with your questions. They were really, really good, and your presentation as well. We actually have a motion that we're bringing to the Assembly next week, and it's around the funding model for sixth forms, and I suppose the pathways that opens up for young people to go into further education, higher education, or to remain at school. So very timely that your presentation is today. So I just had two very quick questions. One was around whether or not you hope to open the survey to other pupils, to other maybe people who are either at school or who have left school. So is there any plans to do that? Because I think it's a brilliant survey and it would be great to see even more responses onto it.
I'd be happy. We'd probably to speak with Claire and Lucy, but I'm sure they'd be happy to send out a survey to other schools, because that'll be really useful to us and to everybody else.
Second that.
We do loads of surveys, so I'm sure it's
brilliant. No, you've obviously done a huge amount of work on it, and it would be really good to get that opinion, I think, right across from others as well. So well done on that. And then my second question was just, I am an MLA in Derry, and the foil learning community is something up here. So it's to see whether or not you have models like that in your own areas as well. So basically, there are quite a number of grammar schools, secondary schools, and so on here. And maybe if there wasn't one subject offered at their school, they might go and do it at another school. So for example, if it was history, that's been mentioned already, if history wasn't available at school A, then you might go and do that at school B. Is that something that you find in all your areas, or is it just in some?
I know from in the area I go to school, I've heard of people doing it. I have never met anyone who has ever done it. But what is more common in that area is people moving school altogether, say going from one grammar school to another, or from a secondary school to a grammar school. For whatever reason, whether it be subject variety, whether it be they have become more academic and want to go to a different school because they can now. But I've heard of people doing it, but it seems to be a lot rarer around me.
To add to Rory's point, I go to St Dominic's, so we're right beside All Saints, and I do see some All Saints students come into our school to learn subjects that maybe All Saints doesn't offer, and they go back and forth between schools because we're quite close.
Just to add to that, in my school I've definitely seen one. I think it's if there's courses that people want to do, like our school would like pupils from other schools would come to our school, or pupils from our school would go to the other school if there's not enough people to do it, but then that makes a class.
Okay.
Very good. So it's something that's done more broadly as well. And do you think it's something, if you knew that a subject wasn't offered in your school, but that it might be offered in another school, do you think that that would put you off doing it if you had to travel, or not, just from your own points of view?
For me, I don't think it would. If I was passionate about doing the subject, especially for say A level, I would definitely travel, as long as it's not an absurd distance.
Although for me, I think it would put me off because previously I've obviously been in the school for 5 years, and the thought of going away again to a completely different school without any of my friends or people that I know would definitely put me off.
I think for me it would put me off as well, because it'd be very daunting, but then also I could just do another subject in my own school and spend more time studying on it, whether instead of having to travel to the other school just to do the different one.
All right, Patrick.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your answers and for your presentation today. It's been really informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Padraig. Okay, so members, thanks for all the questions. Has the CNAG anything that you'd like to add? No? Thanks very much. Stuart?
Just a quick challenge, Chair.
So Stuart's from the Treasury Officer of Accounts.
I work for the Department of
Yeah,
Finance.
and he keeps us all right, yeah.
In the public services, in terms of a thank you for a good job, you normally get another job. So in that spirit, I would like to say the executive draft budget is out for consultation. The way you folks have researched your evidence and delivered it today and dealt with questions, we would like to hear from you on your opinions on our priorities, what we spend money on, what we don't. It's online, there's about 6 fields, it's open for about another 3 weeks, and I would encourage you to say to your colleagues in the Youth Assembly, we want to hear from you. It'd be great. So that's my word of thanks, Chair, and the challenge to the witnesses.
You could end up with jobs out of it.
There we go.
Okay, so thanks very much. Harrison, are you looking in? Yeah.
Just wanted to quickly say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we have already also engaged in something with your department on this. I think there has been some development since then, but I'm sure we would be happy to follow that up.
Harrison, I think you'll make a great politician. So thank you to each of you, Blanid, Harrison, Rory and Paige, for attending, for taking our questions, for being very honest and forthright in where the challenges exist, and also for the engagement with the Vice Chair last week. Her feedback of the session was very, very positive, and we're very, very fortunate to have such great young people in the Youth Assembly, very ably supported by the fantastic team, who I'm glad you're given plenty of work to do. So thank you to all of you, and thank you as well for being with us today. Thank you, Stuart, and thanks to the Audit Office for their work. So thank you, and we'll suspend proceedings briefly before we commence the next session, okay? So I think we're going to do photographs.
Do we photograph?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Photograph members, yes.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate chamber. sound, Senate chamber, 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 sound,
Public session.
Those cameras are green.
Thank you, Mike. Okay. Okay, members, agenda item 5 is the inquiry into major capital projects follow-up report. It's the evidence session today, and we welcome to this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee Jane Brady, the Head of the Civil Service, and Neil Gibson, Accounting Officer for the Department of Finance. We also have with us, remaining with us, Drina Carville, the Controller and Auditor General for the Northern Ireland Audit Office, and Stuart Stevenson, Treasury Officer of Accounts for the Department of Finance, joined by Julie Sewell as well. Okay, members, I refer you to the relevant papers relating to this agenda item, which are pages 28 to 104 of the pack. Ms Brady, Mr Gibson, welcome back to the Public Accounts Committee, and thank you for taking the time to meet us. We had a session just there with the Youth Assembly who kept us well engaged, and we apologise for the brief delay in starting this particular session. We have a number of questions that we'd like to ask you today around the following key themes. One is the role of the Head of the Civil Service and Accounting Officers. 2, information requested by the Public Accounts Committee. 3, workforce and capability plan. 4, the draft ISNI plan. 5 is the next board. 6, evaluation of effectiveness of the next board. And 7 is the ISNI committee. 8, ISNI enabling actions dashboard. 9, the social licensing. And there's also a number of questions in respect of RHA in response to the recent update provided by the Department of Finance. 10 is the implementation of outstanding recommendations, which is question 24 to 28, and 11 is the available documentation. So that we can make the best use of our time this afternoon, can I ask that we keep our answers brief and to the point? I reviewed the previous session, and there was just too many witnesses to get to the nub of some of the core issues, and if we find that there's any deviation from the questioning, we'll have to interject and pull back to point. We're very direct in this committee, and we like to get down to business, so I'm sure you'll appreciate that we have a number of important questions as well. So with that said, I invite you both to make some opening remarks. You'll know that this committee is frustrated that we are having to have you both back to answer some of the questions that we don't feel were answered appropriately at the previous session or indeed in our follow-ups. And we've been very clear with permanent secretaries and senior officials generally throughout each of our inquiries that when we request information, we expect our questions to be answered in a timely fashion and that we don't have to ask witnesses to return to this committee. So I appreciate you both being here, and hopefully today we can make some progress around some of the issues of concern for this Public Accounts Committee. So with that said, you're both welcome, and you're very welcome to brief the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll begin, and I welcome the opportunity to be back following the previous attendance at the committee. I can't commit to being more interesting than your previous attendees at the committee who I saw passing through. In terms of, we haven't prepared any opening remarks because we wanted to be here to listen to you in the interests of time. I guess we understand the areas that you've identified, and we're very happy to give fulsome responses to those and to keep those brief, and also to apologise if there is any perceived frustration in terms of delivery of information. That is very clearly not our intent, and we welcome the scrutiny of this committee in terms of how we can improve and deliver better. But
yep, no, happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before we go to members, I think it's important that I point out, Ms Brady, when you appeared before the committee in October, you assured the members of this committee that you were showing leadership by offering to meet with the committee. However, you also reiterated that the constitutional position of your role meant that ministers continue to have autonomy over their departments and accounting officers, and you do not have a role in policy matters. You also outlined that you have shown leadership through the reconstitution of the NICS board with refreshed terms of reference. However, you did not provide any specific examples of how this has delivered improvements in respect of major capital projects in the 3 years since you have come into post. And given that the accounting officers are accountable to their ministers, and neither you as Hawks nor the NICS board have any authority over accounting officers, how can you and the wider NICS board be confident that you are delivering effective leadership over major capital projects? And further, when you give evidence in October alongside a number of colleagues, as mentioned earlier, despite a number of questions from members of this committee seeking examples of delivery, witnesses retorted to broad statements around leadership and various boards that have been established. What evidence can you provide of effective delivery to address the issues impacting on major capital projects?
Thank you, Chair, and also to reflect the PAC's recommendations in terms of the head of the civil service reflecting those in other jurisdictions, particularly in Scotland, where the accounting officer for the Scottish Government, the PermSec, is the overall accounting officer. That does not reflect the constitutional reality of the governance structures within the Northern Ireland executive, and of course that is a constitutional matter, and as an official it's not for me to opine on that. However, it's, as me as the head of the civil service, it is reflecting the need for the joined up approaches that we require across the service to ensure that we're doing all that we can at an official level. The PAC recommendation to reflect that constitutional arrangement, PAC recommendation 1, was noted by the executive, but it was not agreed, and those are the constitutional realities. In the establishment of the acknowledgement of the issues which the PAC report have reflected, the need for joined up approaches and identifying cross-cutting areas, that was in fact the recommendations of this board to establish a reconstituted NICS committee, to establish as part of that industry experts within capability in the areas that needed to be addressed collectively as the Civil Service Board, and we have, and I have done that, and we met with one of the chair of the ISNA committee at the previous evidence session. To give you some time, and as part of that, we have looked towards the root cause analysis of the PAC findings in terms of the overrun. They have identified a number of 12 enabling actions. I understand we will discuss those furthermore. We also analysed the 105 recommendations that came out of the PAC report in terms, and also CBI, IOD reports to make sure that we're coalescing those both in terms of looking back to address the concerns, but also how we look forward in terms terms of delivering the investment strategy for Northern Ireland, which the Executive is looking to put in place for this mandate and indeed beyond. But you also asked about the tangible impact that's made. So we now have a subcommittee overseeing both the ISNI strategy once it comes out as a vehicle at the programme board for that, but also monitoring of these enabling actions which we know will underpin it. We had a civil service board just this week, and in terms of the actual actions that are coming through, you asked for tangible information and the actions they've taken. The major projects were presented to that board with recommendations from that committee. There were identified a number of consecutive reds as part of those reporting. It was agreed by that next board that actually the ISNI committee should perform a scrutiny function in terms of those projects within a sector, that we should look towards both what are the root cause analysis of that overspend, but what can we do to intervene in terms of supporting those. So that was a structure within the next board to identify that. It also looked towards what levels of reporting we should do from a scrutiny perspective and increase that to 10 million as part of those areas. We have also agreed at the board level, and again that joined up level, the methods of reporting, and you will have seen the documents. There's the process from the ISNI, the tool that was used, the managing public projects, that there needs to be more up-to-date analysis and correlated data across the system. So we have, through one of those projects, delivered a data map function that was provided as part of the correspondence back to this committee. That was agreed by the Civil Service Board that should be embedded within all the projects so that there is a corollary of all the information that we need to analyse it. Because some of this, as I'm sure you'll have seen, is how you actually get the information to make informed decisions. Some of it's looking back. What are the root causes that have got us into this position? And they're clearly defined. How do we look towards all those recommendations and make sure we have a sense of what we're doing with those? But also then, how do we get the data and evidence real time to understand how those may be impacted in the future? So I hope that's given you some view of the framework within the constitutional environment that we operate, but the areas that we are looking towards progressing. I will also say that part of the process, and you're aware that obviously ministers direct their departments, as is rightly so, and the accounting officer is responsible to these committees, is under the direction and control of their minister, but I am their line manager. So those structures that are instituted as part of that, the monitoring that we'll provide at the Civil Service Board will allow me to have forums to hold my permanent secretary colleagues accountable for the areas that they are responsible, and that information will be provided through those committees in a qualified and quantified information to allow me to perform that my line management role in that regard. I don't know whether, Neil, you have any further examples from?
Just a couple to add to that would be things like there is a behavioural change when you have that level of scrutiny that Jane has spoken about. So having, which you'll have seen, the enabling actions and a regular standing item on the next board, coming evidence from the ISNI subcommittee, bringing those things forward for us to consider. It means it's coming back every month, and certainly, although obviously Department of Finance doesn't have any capital projects on that list, seeing those coming forward in front of your peers, talking collegiately, leaning in, trying to help, trying to support, has meant that there's already been some things progressed in Department of Finance that maybe in a previous time would have taken a bit longer. So things like procurement limit changes, which we're working through, looking at the practicalities of delegated limits to departments, accelerating the processes because they're coming out of these evidence reports to say that. So those are, although those are more in the policy framework, if you like, they're all coming out of that increased scrutiny at the NICS board.
Okay, I accept, that the constitutional legal position between here and Scotland is different, but it's the tangible impact that's important, and I think that that's a point of concern. Can I ask what targets have been set, and are they measurable? And can you share the targets with this committee?
So the targets that are set in terms of the KPIs are being defined in terms of the enabling actions. We can provide those. We have a dashboard that was presented both in terms of the major projects, which was presented to the Civil Service Board on Monday, plus also the status of the 8 of the 12 enabling actions and the deliverables that had to be provided with each of those. I think we had 5 ambers in the previous report, which was in November, which was provided. Those have now moved through the actions that have been delivered from the enabling actions into green as well. So absolutely we can provide those papers to you.
We're also in that one of the enabling actions is to look at better data mapping to make the exercise of indeed the NIAO and indeed us within the next board a little bit easier, because there is a lot of information out there amongst different the COPs at departmental level, so trying to get one version that would be much easier to interrogate and look at in terms of some of those metrics. Each individual department will have, like I have 2 COPs within my area, and they have their own KPIs which are published and reported upon on our website.
And it would be our view that the major projects would be integrated with the projects in the investment strategy, so we have one common source of projects, but also one common source of KPIs and data to inform those. And also some of the structures for reporting have been manually based in different mechanisms with departments. That will be a standard that was agreed with the next board on Tuesday. That would be a standard format which PermSecs have committed that will be delivered within their projects, so we have an actual evidence base to make qualified judgments of where things are moving outside those boundaries.
Yeah. Do you accept that the issues that are of note here have persisted and the weaknesses have persisted for a considerable period of time?
I absolutely accept that we have to do better, and there's the PAC report, talked of the overspends, but I'm very clear that it's not just the overspends, which are majorly significant. It is the lost opportunity. It is the deaths on our roads. It is the schools that are deteriorating. So it is not sufficient for me to come here and say there is a governance structure in Northern Ireland which doesn't allow me to direct. I and we as leaders need to find a way to address those issues. But actually, it's until you interrogate the information behind that. We had 105 recommendations. The SIB root cause analysis identified some clear areas that actually we need to unpick to address those. So we can talk about some of the delays and the A5, the cost for it, and the loss of life for it. That was 2012, estimated to be about 800 million for 2018, and much escalated, but the lives and the impact in those areas. Much of that isn't down to actually kind of a function of one individual. That's largely around that, when we look into it, planning and social licence, and how we actually build that into the process. And whilst it's done in piecemeal in areas across the service, there are good examples of us doing it well. This needs to be a collective effort, so we have to provide structures across the service. We had to interrogate, and that's what SIB did, very detailed analysis based on the PAC reports. What are the things that are underpicking that these are happening time and time again? And they identified 3 broad areas. One was about the people, the capability that we had in the service, but also the training that we provided. Others was about the processes that we put in place. And those are about the business plan process, how we look towards those areas, the procurement. And then the other areas, and planning, of course, is part of that, the immediate planning and the structures that we have with the PAC. And then we need to look at policy to go towards 80% of our energy by 2030 in terms of net zero. There needs to be fundamental changes. So to understand those these are the issues we need to affect, and they need to be cross-cutting. The committee that's established has leads for those, but actually they engage with all the SROs, so that collective way, the business plan process, which engaged to say, how do we actually look towards changes, and there was tangible outcome came from that, which was in the next board. So 105 of our SROs attended that event, led by that. Some of them delivering well on their projects, but actually understanding where the areas are that we need to actually focus and address, and then holding everyone to account for that and reporting that, both in terms of that board, but also to the next board in terms of how we drive those forward.
Yep. But the fact remains, these projects have overspent by billions now, and that has a direct significant cost on a wide range of things. There are elements that are beyond your control, without a doubt. But equally, you've mentioned the A5. One of the main hurdles of the A5 originally was that a core directive wasn't carried out into the project, which caused it to be delayed originally. So the point I'm asking when I look across these projects is, why are given what you've said to this committee, why are these issues continuing to persist today? Given all these structures and everything else, why are they continuing to persist and cause considerable issues?
Well, obviously, major capital projects have a major timeline to progress in some of those areas. So these are not things that you can quickly fix in terms of delivery. I think if you look towards the A5 as an example, so there was a 3 billion overspend in terms of estimation. 1 billion plus of that is in the A5. The estimations that we look towards on that timeline, and indeed that 50% of that's inflationary based. Also, and I came back at some of the recommendations, that those increase in cost estimates are based on your outline business case. Your outline business case could be viewed as being based on areas where you haven't got confirmed planning, you haven't provided procurement. So actually, if you look towards where the final business case is delivered, towards that outturn, there's a 10% overspend, some very significant differences in that. So there's the global aspect, and then there's the aspects in terms of our processes. But actually, the areas that we have identified have analysed those areas, the particular areas in that people and that process and in the policy. So some of them are outside our control in terms of the global aspects, but there are many which are, and they require a focus and analysis and an action plan and a delivery. And of course, things should have gone quicker and faster. It was clear to me the recommendations were that the Civil Service Board should be reconstituted. We should have experts on the board. We did that, but actually bringing that information to the board, there was no way to unpick what are the underlying issues which are causing these to happen and happen again. It wasn't this is a problem, we can fix it, because actually it requires a joint collective across the service. Our constitutional structures don't allow that to happen. So we have provided those frameworks. I believe, and the proof will be as it plays out, it is a fundamentally different structure and methodology for addressing those areas. There will be much more that we will have to do. The way we've identified, we're going to scrutinise some of those projects which have joint red. That will be a different way of doing that. But I believe it is a marked shift from where it has been over the past number of years.
I think the only thing I would add to that, Chair, is certainly in my coming up to 3 years in this post, better data is the first thing. Originally, it was almost impossible to really put your hand on exactly what the data was telling you. That's getting much better, but we're still some way to go, so it'll be much easier to continually report. That'll allow us to spot things earlier. But there's also a leadership dimension to that too, which I have a responsibility for, as do all of my colleagues, about making sure people feel, bring the early areas of concern early, bring them to us quickly. That's why we have gateway reports, which are really proven very valuable, certainly to me as an accounting officer. Highlight reports, much shorter, much sharper. What exactly are the issues that you're facing? Tell us early. It's not about trying to catch anyone out. It's trying to see, can we identify anything that's going wrong? And we'll pick it up later in questioning. But you can take some really good lessons from the SIB report, from some of the data that we've got. Social licence would be one obvious one, but there are some common themes. But equally, each of the projects has its own story to tell, and it's important, therefore, which is why I think the board structure is working better now. Each of those accounting officers has their story to tell about exactly what happened in that particular project. Could have been inflationary, could have been a supplier going bust, could be all sorts of complicated reasons, but there are actual common themes across it, and some of those, for me, the key ones, if you look at all the new procurement and the policy statements that we will do around that, transparency, better data, shorter, more to the point information, so that we don't get clogged up. So the big change for me personally, 105 recommendations across all those reports, even if you sat and read them all. The SIB report points to this too, even reading all the planning regulations, it is impossible to think anyone will do that and not miss something. So having 12 enabling actions for us to be able to say to committees like this and to the NIAO, that's what we're going to try and drive performance improvement on, I think will yield dividends. But as Jane has said, it does take a little bit of time. These projects have a long gestation. So, for example, social licence, by its very nature, something needs to come in right at the beginning. So you'll see that more in future projects. It's also been very important for me to try and offer that support to our SROs. You don't get any additional reward for being an SRO, but you certainly get a significant level of pressure and scrutiny. So we've really tried to bring together events for all of them, training, collective leadership, knowledge, create a community of them so that they feel they can ring each other to get a little bit of support and help. We've obviously the metrics that we can supply on the people that we've put through more training, and that's really beginning to pay dividends as well.
Yeah, I note you've said it takes time to do some of these things, but a lot of these projects have been outstanding and delayed for a significant period of time. So there's major concerns, as you will be aware. Jane, just as well, in relation to the evidence session that this committee held, and I was absent at the time, on the 3rd of October, we asked for a number of pieces of information, and whilst we recognise that some of this was delivered in October, some of this information has only been provided in the last week, so from October to now. And the draft ISNI list remains outstanding, with no indication given as to when it was submitted to the First and Deputy First Minister, or when it is anticipated to go to the Executive for approval. So just give us some clarification around that. And a further question is the Workforce and Capability Plan, which we appreciate you've furnished us with a copy. Given the delays seen in some of the other enabling work streams, do you expect delivery of this plan to remain on schedule?
Thank you. And again, apologies if there's a perceived lateness of documentation. That isn't our intent. I'll maybe ask Neil to discuss on the workforce plan. The ISNI strategy, as with the ISNI work plan, as with the programme for government that is draft, is policy under review. So it has not yet been, they're draft versions, and it has not been agreed by their First and Deputy First Minister. And of course, as is the protocol, under that basis, has not been agreed from a timeline or scheduling to the Executive in that regard. So it's not within the ability of officials, obviously, to share documentation which is in policy under development at this stage, Chair.
And in respect to the workforce plan, yes, I would be confident, largely pointing back to a point I made a moment ago. From a leadership point of view, we have Patrick McGee as the non-executive direct leader, and I have Sharon Smith from my side, who many of the committee will be familiar with, and we've Scott Wilson, and there are a number of other individuals you'll see named on the plans. But with people like that, I have every confidence we'll deliver. What you'll notice in that workforce plan is we've really tried to focus our efforts. If you go back to that 105 down to 12 points, you can almost take on too much. So one of the key things is to focus into those ALBs with significant responsibility for delivering capital, so that we can better understand. It's likely that whatever lessons will come from them in workforce issues will be relevant elsewhere. Really critical issue around workforce planning at the minute is salary levels. And of course, if as a public service in the widest sense, if we're competing against each other, there is a situation of bidding up wages into an unaffordable position. So it's really important that we look strategically at the workforce issues, rather than just, say, for example, me sitting here and saying, well, I'm only responsible for NICS staff. We cannot have a situation where different COPs are able to offer different remuneration packages, and then that tells you have a different problem, which is the overall quantum of people skilled, and we need to be looking at training and developing, not allowing pay to work its way around that problem. So I think that's the right programme of work, is to do workforce planning around and take a look into those areas that make up the bulk of the capital spend. And then hopefully the lessons will be able to flow out of that for some of the smaller organisations like my own.
Okay, I'll come back to a number of points. Just to raise the thing, perceived delay, Jane, it was a delay. The information was requested in October. It is now the end of January. It's taken quite a significant period, so we're not...
I'll commit to following up to understand what the cause of that delay was, and again, I apologise, and I'll come back to you with a response.
Yeah, it only arrived 3 weeks ago, yeah, so from the start of October to then is just not acceptable, to be honest. So. I'll move on to other members, starting with David Honeyford, MLA. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Neil, for coming in. Just to follow on that ISNI draft plan, can you confirm what date that list of projects was referred to the Executive, the First and Deputy First Minister, and when is it expected for approval, or the Executive for approval?
As I said, we haven't reached a final version of any of those, so none of those have been referred to the Executive, and they're currently policy under development.
They've been referred to the First and Deputy First Minister for approval?
Well, as is normal when we go through the review process.
What date were they sent to the First and Deputy First Minister?
It's still in draft, so there will be multiple versions which will be reviewed, but I can come back on...
We're talking months, or we're talking weeks? You know, I understand there's drafts and there's various versions, but when was the latest draft? When was that with the First and Deputy First Minister?
So there's various versions of that, so I can come back with a response. There has been ongoing versions. I mean, obviously the initial document went out for consultation, but there hasn't been an agreed version of the document. It is in draft, and there's still issues that are still being resolved, so we're not in a position to have between the First and Deputy First Minister, or on the issues is the issues between the First and Deputy First Minister? Is that the delay, or is it because I'm trying to work out why? I guess it's ongoing. It hasn't reached a final conclusion in terms of what the issues are. So it's still policy under development, as is the position with many documents in terms of their review status.
So the evidence session, it said that in this, maybe this leads on from that, but it doesn't cover all the major capital projects, and that's what the information was provided to the NAO. But whenever you look at correspondence advising the draft list, that projects did capture all that was committed and ongoing projects across the current major capital projects portfolio. But we also noting that some of the documentation provided to the committee refers to non-ISNI projects. So can you clarify why is there that differential between those?
Could you repeat the question?
So we've got information in the evidence session. You told us that the draft ISNI didn't cover all major capital projects, and that was the information you also sent to the auditor. But when the correspondence has come back, you've advised that the draft list did cover all the ISNI projects and captured all that was committed to. It's the clarity around that of why the two are obviously opposite.
Okay. So the ISNI will include the major projects, capital projects, so apologies for that. The correspondence is correct, and apologies if that was gave a different impression in terms of the evidence. Don't know whether you have any?
No, it will contain all major, so £20 million projects. You can always still have some, you wouldn't think there would be ambiguity, but sometimes, for example, I have projects that one might imagine are capital projects but turn out to be revenue projects just because of the actual precise definition. You're not creating new software, you're using off the shelf. So there are some areas that you might think of spend that wouldn't sit in it normally. There's obviously that threshold of what considers a major project. And again, that's something that you have to always keep under review because what if you have 4 sub-projects of the same? Do you add it together as a programme and include it? So there can still be a little bit of fine-tuning to make sure what's in, but the intent is that ISNI will contain all major projects so we can report singularly. And where we have projects that fall under that, but they still have a significant risks profile, we'll continue to report on them using the same mechanism, albeit not within that strategy document, but the subcommittee that we talked about before would get the information. So in other words, any area of what we perceive as having a level of risk will be reported on to that subcommittee of the NICS board.
I just wanted to tease something that David has asked. So I'm a bit confused about this process with First and Deputy First Minister. So are you saying, Jane, that it was given in draft form to them and it's a fluid document presently, or what? I'm just a bit confused.
Yes, it is in draft form. It is not an agreed document. Yes.
So the executive was re-established in February last year. We're entering our year of return. So when did they receive the original draft, the initial draft? I'm just trying to get how what the urgency is with this. So when did they receive it last week? Did they receive it 6 months ago? How long has this been looked at?
It's been looked at over a period of months, but as you'd appreciate, there are other areas that the executive and ministers are looking at. So
no, but I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about this particular area. So when from your knowledge was that draft? I just need to know when this is going to be produced into an actual material document. So when was the First and Deputy First Minister given that draft?
As is normal in terms of policy development, we would be working with advisors and ministers in terms of that. I don't actually have the specifics of a date. Happy to take that under advice and to come back.
Have they been given it at all?
Yes, it has been shared within the Executive Office and we have been working with it, but it is a draft document, it's policy under development.
I'm just trying to get a sense of the urgency given that you're saying you recognise how important this is.
One thing, Chair, I think is relevant in this, and again, I can't speak too much detail because as Jane has said, it's under development. But to give you an example of the sort of thing that comes along that changes the direction a little bit, obviously with the return of the executive, there was the financial package to return, in which there was a requirement for an investment strategy. And our intention, working at official level, was to make sure there was only one capital investment plan for Northern Ireland, not two separate documents. So that then required a different piece of work to be able to go into the document that wouldn't have been there in its pre-executive returning gestation. So that gives you an example of some of the work that we would have to do as officials to provide more material to go into. Because if you think of a previous iterations of ISNI, they can talk about the principles of development, they might talk about themes, they might have flagship, but this has to have a list of all projects in it. That's a different requirement, and that was part of the requirement coming back for the executive coming back.
Okay.
Is there ever a point we get to a point where we have an actual document? If it's a living document, you're describing something that's always changing. So is there ever a point that there's a document that goes for approval?
Yes, there will be a document that goes, and indeed there's a requirement that there is, but it will remain. I mean, you see all the time with.
When is that date?
Well, it's due imminent.
So it's due now, imminently, mean weeks, days.
I mean, obviously can't speak to the decision-making process politically, but yes, it is due.
It's the point of where it goes from you as a finished document to the executive officer. That is due to happen imminently.
Yeah, but we will always keep it under review, because you can imagine capital projects that have finished now. I
totally understand. It's a fluid document. I totally understand that. What I'm saying is the point of where it hits the executive office. When that is imminently being days, weeks, months, which is...
I don't know. I can't speak to that.
That would be for ministers to decide at what point it's ready to go into executive consideration.
Okay.
You okay?
Yeah.
Right, Dan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for coming back here today. My questions are focused around the next board, and I think you've sort of covered a little bit of my first question. So in your letter to us on the 11th of October, you referred to the biannual report to the next board detailing projects and programmes isn't used to monitor costs and times, but is used to identify common themes behind the delays to projects. And I think you've sort of touched on those, referring to people, processes, policy, data collection and those types of things. So my question is, what can you outline clearly to us what has been delivered by the next board following identification of these thematic areas in terms of corrective action to reduce delays based on that?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I did reference some of the actions that were taken, and perhaps this week's a good example in that from the major projects presented, there were some which had thematically kind of concurrent reds as part of their status. So it was agreed that we would that the ISNI committee would perform engagement with SROs and leads within a particular sector to understand what the root causes was of that delays, to see if any support or challenge could be provided to get those both within track. So that gives one specific issue. There was the thresholds in terms of monitoring of those reports, which again was agreed by the next board to increase that to a threshold of 10 million and to undertake some pilots in terms of that approach. And I guess that the data map perspective, where PermSec, the next board, agreed, and this was following the analysis from the ISNI committee, and they'd done a pilot already to evaluate this, so it wasn't just it was a qualified exploration where they'd modelled what the data is that should be provided up, that the PermSec agreed that this would be the data system that they would work within their departments in order to deliver. There'll obviously be a follow-up in terms of the issues that were raised from those, kind of tracking red and red amber projects, which will then feed back both into that group but to the next board itself.
Thank you for that. And whilst those responses are all really good, but they're all very strategic and bigger picture and longer term, and just in our assessment of the next board, just trying to get to the root cause to allow us as part of this inquiry to make the best recommendations possible. It's the short, sharp corrective action to reduce delays that we're looking to on that. And just to move on then, are the next board cited on the specifics of time and cost overruns on projects?
Just to concur, or to follow up, that review that's taking place in those that sector, and kind of those, and there's a number of projects. There will be in specific projects, and they will be regarding is there short, sharp, or indeed underpinning aspects. So that will be addressing that kind of that overall governance. It'll be led by the committee, so it'll have the expertise from all those enabling actions and the expert to delve into that. It'll be the SROs for those specific projects and the further sectors within there. So that will be actually taking short action as well as identifying kind of thematic areas. And I guess that's, I think, from what I've heard from the committee, and indeed is a direction of travel that you would like the next board to be more engaged with, which is concurred from with the board.
Absolutely. And just to follow up again on that last point, are the board cited on specifics of time and cost overruns when they meet?
Not currently. The data mapping exercise that we're doing, we're hoping that will be able to be put into it. Now, we're always conscious of not creating another level of bureaucracy or scrutiny. So obviously within committees and within individual departments, accounting officers have to speak to all of their deadlines, delays, cost overruns. So there's already significant scrutiny there. But we're looking at the data mapping to see whether there would be common data fields and things that we could be able to bring in a reporting, making this type of exercise easier to do. So, work in progress. We're just doing that data mapping at the minute, working through with COPES where we would get that information. If you look at the new procurement strategy that's coming, big theme of that is all about transparency and better data and better intelligible data. So we hope that we will have, but as it stands at the minute, no, the next board would not go through the same level of detail that you would, for example, at your individual departmental boards, where you'd be looking at the scrutiny of individual projects.
I feel that that's very simple and very important, because we could be talking about significant amounts of time, and we're obviously talking about billions of pounds here. And I think if you're sitting as a board, it's important not just to have the traffic lights, but to have a very clear sight of the numbers that we're talking about here. And if those numbers on time and cost overruns aren't presented to the board, can you explain how the departments are then made accountable for their time and cost overruns through you, Jane, as head of civil service, and also through the board?
Well, Neil referenced the kind of the responsibility for the SRO in terms of those projects, and then there's a departmental oversight where there's a project office that looks towards those portfolios. They are then scrutinised through the committee in terms of the ISNA committee and those areas. Then that will come and escalate through the gateway reviews, which do identify the flags of red and red, which will be based on some of those factors in terms of that readiness. And then the further analysis under that regarding the investigation is going to take place. But I guess ultimately the responsibility for an accounting officer is in their responsibility as delivering of those projects and under the direction of the minister.
I'm just concerned, and I think the committee is just concerned as to if it stops with the permanent secretary, who is, the oversight to that and these huge projects. And you'd spoke in the introductory remarks at the previous evidence session of the need for collective leadership and breaking down perceived silos. But if the next board in dealing with this aren't dealing as a collective with the cost and time overruns, how do we expect to reduce delays and spiralling costs that we continue to see under the current way things are being done?
Well, speaking to those points that Neil referred to as well is the data and evidence to inform those decisions, to actually provide qualification to help and support those. This will be able to provide information that actually will hold departments and indeed projects to account, whether they are being flagged as part of that status, and will also then be able to inform how we manage those issues and mitigate them. But also my role as a line manager, without going over the responsibility of a minister for delivery within his department, we will have information that will allow us to make more qualified judgments on that, which will allow me.
No, and it's obviously there's the crossover, there's ISNI, there's the board, there's yourself, there's the departments, and I totally appreciate that. But I'm just trying to get to, the root of good recommendations for us to be able to make here in terms of the board. And again, when you appeared with us here in October, you talked about how the board was reconstituted in response to the recommendations. I just want to know how, over these past 2 years, you have evaluated the effectiveness of the next board.
So we're currently undertaking an external effectiveness review that's ongoing at the moment.
Who's doing that?
It's Baker Tilly, and we're happy. I think we shared the terms of reference, but we have now engaged them. They have observed board sessions that will opine on the government's arrangements and also the composition of the board, the skills mix, relationship to the board and the subcommittees as well. We're expecting the findings to be delivered by the end of March.
And within that, you say they're reviewing like the board and the skills mix. Are they also reviewing the information that comes to the board and whether things like cost and time delays should be in the information?
They are just looking. So the review of their evaluation of their role and their the governance arrangements and effectiveness of the board as well in terms of the decision making. So that would include the information that comes to the board and the decision making that it takes as part of that.
And then what would be the plans for ongoing assessment and reaction following this review?
Obviously, once the findings are provided, we will factor those into how we address those recommendations. I don't want to preempt the recommendations from the process itself. But I guess it's important, again, to have that scrutiny function. I guess recognising that the transition from where the next board was, which was established, was just the head of the civil service and the permanent secretaries, to having non-executives now was a big step. Then also in terms of the structure to have non-execs as part of that, and then further a structure to have a number of subcommittees delivering as part of that. So the need to acknowledge that the transition, but also that there's ways that we need to feed that into to our structures going forward.
I think as well, Dan, I think it's really important. It's an often thrown away word, but culture matters. So as a board that is taking more collective thinking, then having reports on areas that are relevant. So for example, I should be going home worrying about even though I'm not a big capital spending department, but I'm a member of the next board. So that setting up of committees, regular reporting of items does change the behaviours there, because ultimately it isn't only about scrutiny, it's about support. It's about thinking about how we can help colleagues if there are challenges or difficulties. And certainly the biggest change I've seen in the last period around this capital area has been that SRO network, where it's been quite a lonely and high pressure existence, starting to create a community of that. We're trying to do the same with the NICS board, where people feel that other perm secretaries are thinking, worrying, concerned about what can we do, what other expertise might we have in another area to lean in and support, so that the boundaries between departments become a little bit less clear. And certainly that's something I'm seeing with, historically would a Department of Finance have been focusing on a capital, because it doesn't deliver any capital projects, or take another area that I'd be interested in around workforce, which I'm sure we'll come on to in future inquiries. You have departments with 10,000 staff and you have departments with a few hundred, but we need all to be collectively worried about workforce questions. So I think some of the changes are both cultural and leadership led, as well as they are the material and the content. But I concur with your view, and that's certainly one of the enabling actions, is what could we get quicker, easier, that we could use to make to provide better insight and better support on. It's hard to do that without the right evidence.
Thank you, and that's very helpful just to get clarity on those points in terms of the board. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to Tom Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. And just to deal with the ISNI committee, a subgroup of the next board, how can you be confident that there is sufficient independence and accountability and governance over the work of the committee?
Well, the appointment of an independent non-executive member was a critical aspect, I felt, and again it was a recommendation of the PAC to the next board itself. That committee is chaired by one of those individuals who comes with relevant infrastructure financing experience as well, to provide that level of scrutiny. Obviously within departments themselves, the Dear Accounting Officer also request to have external expertise as part of those project boards as well. So there's a further level of external scrutiny and support within those areas. Obviously the Audit Office provides a very important aspect within those frameworks as well. So we are, within the structures we have external representation provided. Some of the enabling actions that we're looking at is looking towards an industry reference panel as well, to support some of the further investment decisions that we need to look to make and to engage. Obviously the Department for Finance through the procurement has significant engagement with the sector and the procurement facilities as well. But within the governance structures, having that led by an independent non-executive gives me an assurance that there is obviously that independence as part of that governance structure.
Okay. What role then does the ISNI committee play in ensuring departmental accountability for delays and overruns, and how does this feed into the process of the wider next board?
So the responsibility for individual project overruns will have an SRO within a department. Obviously, the department is under the direction of the minister in place with that, and the accounting officer with responsibilities. So there'll be a responsibility as part of that SRO. They will then have a further responsibility into their department, their accounting officer, and that will be a project office across that portfolio within the department. Through that, they'll also be responsible. They are responsible as part of the ISNI committee, which is the major projects, and that information is provided into Department of Finance for correlating those. The ISNI committee itself is proposed once the ISNI strategy is agreed that would become the programme board through the next board for monitoring those. So versus a project by project perspective, there will be an overall responsibility reflecting the executive's responsibility for delivery of the ISNI strategy, and that would be delivered at the next board level, and then with the ISNI committee providing assurances. The role of the ISNI committee will be to track and to monitor those projects within the ISNI strategy. It'll also be then to identify root causes if any of those are going outside track, but also then to provide suggestions in terms of remedial action to bring those within scope, and also then to report and provide assurance to the next board that they are on track, and indeed what remedial action could be taking place, as I outlined to Ms Forsyth, regarding looking towards specific focuses if projects are indeed going off direction. I don't know, Neil, whether you want to respond any further?
No, just to echo the fact that there's quite a significant scrutiny mechanism within committees and within departments, obviously under the control of ministers. So what the hope is, the next board will have that kind of more strategic information to see if there are common themes that we can really then look to. What I find relevant in that governance structure, though, is it then helps us set out a training programme and we've set up a set of SRO training days, all related to things that have come out of the conversations at the next board, to say, okay, the issue is business cases, okay, the issue is communications, then let's have a look at that, and let's bring in external people to come and speak and help train us. So there's a identifying of themes that are then taken away in different fora to try and develop. Either they might be training needs or they might be around different data that might need to be collected.
Has that training proved effective?
Yes, I mean, obviously there's some sense in which that has to bear fruit over time, but we're already seeing one of the ways I detect it is in things like, for example, training around business cases. We now have people and departments volunteering for pilots to look at. We talk a lot about proportionate effort and making the business cases proportionate to how big they should be, how much detail they need, and we're really seeing a lot more willingness to work in tandem with us on that and actually pilot it, showcase it to other colleagues so that they can look at it. So it is early days. We've only had 5 of those training sessions. The board's only been constituted in this way for a while, but I would say yes, we're beginning to see early dividends from that in terms of willingness to be piloting new ways of doing things.
Given the delays and the overruns, then are you satisfied that the committee are on top of their game?
I think the committee is established for just over constituted for me almost up a year. It's had 5 meetings. Off that, it's established an SRO network to provide references for some of those key areas, and it's had 4 engagements with that. So there's been substantive body of work. I have sat in to observe the committee, although I don't have a role per se, and I guess the what I see is a very something positive is actually these are departments working together in common cause to address these issues, which is the actual, there's policies and procedures and structures, but actually it's about people and how we work together and learn those areas, so common areas before they address. I think it's really important that we're having a review of next board and its effectiveness, it's really important to hear the outworkings of this committee, because we are doing something new from what was done before. We are trying to analyse not just what has happened in the past, but looking forward, the level of environmental legislation requirements. Even if we addressed all the issues in the past, we need to look forward to see actually what do we need to put in place in terms of addressing those new challenges.
How are you measuring progress on that, if any progress at all?
So we measure the progress in terms of all the enabling actions. They have a status, what's to be delivered in the next 3 months, what was delivered. That status changes, and those they meet the month before the next board. That status has changed. There was 5, I'm correcting the figures, of those areas that were amber before. They have now moved into green, which was reported to the next board on Tuesday. So those are being progressed and worked on. I've listened in and I've heard the outputs and workings of those areas. There are specific work streams that are undertaken. The nature of these areas, because we're delivering the enabling action, some of it's discovery, so some of it is actually preempting areas that we need to look at, particularly if you look towards the social licence aspect. And in the Dare Accounting Officer talks about the need to engage with the community in advance of going into a project proposal. There was the procurement policy update by the executive agreed just before Christmas, that needs to look towards that social value prior, during and after. But also we understand that that's not sufficient. It's actually what are the guidelines that go alongside that, because even ticking those boxes isn't going to be sufficient. And you get that by getting the network of people who have done it before, which is our SRO network. You get it by focusing a particular work stream on that. You have them all together. You say what has worked well, what has not worked well, because we know that actually many of our issues is that we didn't have that social licence. We went with a de facto, this is it, and a plan and a OBC and a FPC, but we didn't understand actually the reality of the environment that you were fitting into. And then the consequence of that is the legal challenge that comes with that, which may actually be not at all aligned towards the issue, that the kind of the material fact that the social value, you haven't brought the community with you. So that's not something you can do in a policy, note itself. It's actually about understanding what's worked before and how you need to bring those areas forward. Now, so each of them has a phase perspective. We will learn, we will get things wrong, but actually we are identifying the areas that we know we need to focus on, and we need to have a collective position on those. So I don't know whether Neil, you have any other?
Happy to share. We just had a board this week. Like an action plan highlight report, so you can get a flavour. It might help the committee in thinking about whether you think this type of reporting will help us have the level of precision that you're seeking. So we're happy to share that we've just had the latest one there this week, so that might be quite useful for the committee just to see in what type of reporting is coming through as to how we're moving forward each of these different thematic areas. It's certainly more manageable, thinking I can sit here confidently and say I believe we as a board will make progress on 12 actions, where I definitely would tell you we couldn't on 105. So I think at least there's a structure to driving progress that there wasn't before.
Okay, and does the committee oversight and reporting arrangements apply to all major capital projects, or only to those included in the final approved list of ISNI projects?
I think to the point earlier, it's all the major projects that are included. So we will be removing the major. We got the report from the major projects this next board, but they will be hopefully integrated into the final document. So we'll have one common set of projects in a common format with common reporting.
You okay, Tom? Okay. All right. Colin?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you both for your answers thus far. Just a few questions around the ISNI dashboard. And I do note that you've provided members with the dashboard presented to the board in September 24, and then a further update back in the 9th of January of this year. But I'm concerned to note, as the committee, that 3 out of the 4 actions due for milestone delivery provided in the October dashboard have not yet been met. Why is this, and what is the reasons for failure to deliver against these milestones?
So I think the report that you provided was the one that was provided in November, if that's correct. since it has been updated, and we can provide you revised updates as of the report to the next board, and they're all now green. Mitigating action has been taken to bring them all within scope, so they're all, and in fact I attended that committee meeting previously to go through the feedback from the departments in terms of that. So we're all now to RAG status of green for those actions in the Enabling Action Plan.
There are a few
Can you forward an update?
We can. There's also a few that move because they're contingent on something else. So, for example, some of the work that would be in my area around procurement will depend on the publication of ISNI, and once that's officially, then we will write the procurement plan to that. Same as Programme for Government has some relevance in a number of areas as well. So there's a few are slightly codependent on some other things that are not within the committee's control, but we can give you the latest update of that. In fact, we had an update this week, so we can provide that for you.
No, that's great. And then just in around project number 11, and then enabling actions, can you tell us more about the project? Have the terms of reference been presented to the ISNI committee? What is the next milestone for this project number 11?
Yes, so project number 11 is the energy legislation regulatory priorities, and again we have status update which we're very happy to provide to you. So the main focus, the key activities provided during the period from November to December was utility regulator engagement in preparation for the decarbonisation bill, public consultation design plan for rollout of smart electric meters, renewable energy support scheme, engaging on the legislative pathway. There was meetings between senior DFE and DFI officials to discuss actions to increase the flow of renewable energy, and terms of reference developed for the project group, which was a point you raised. The further aspects that they've identified for January to February as the milestones, which will then inform the latest RAG status, is to agree those terms of reference for the 2030 project group. And again, their draft ones are available for policy development in terms of the green hydrogen energy interconnection storage, and progress those aspects. So they are due to be, they're in draft at this stage, but due to be agreed in terms of reference in January, February, and those will then be advised in terms of the next RAG status. The committee in general meets about 4 weeks before the next board meets, so it provides the updates in a timely fashion to be reflected in the next board for any action.
And then lastly, Chair, just one, there's a real need for urgency in driving change to how NICS delivers major capital projects. The dashboard provided is a high-level snapshot and does not give any sense of the total number of milestones and, importantly, then delivery dates for the overall ISNI action plan. Can you update the committee this afternoon on what is the timescale for implementation of each of the 12 enabling actions, and when can we expect to see impact?
So in terms of reporting, there's 2 aspects that are being reported. There is the enabling actions, which are the 12 enabling actions, and they have specific delivery milestones, and we're very happy to provide those. The milestones in the latest report are detailing those out for the next period of months. Those are the enabling aspects, such as development of guidelines for social licence, for an example, and we believe that they will be key barriers to successfully key areas to support successful delivery of the actual projects. The projects will be provided in the investment plan for ISNI once it is agreed, and they will also be monitored through the ISNI committee and then through to the next board. At the moment, the projects that are being brought to the board for discussion are those major projects, the MPPs, of which we talked about earlier. There is a further scrutiny exercise in some of those areas which have a red flag status. So there would be the updates in terms of, to summarise, where the enabling actions are, which we can give you, the status and timelines for those deliverables, but then there would be the timelines for the actual projects themselves. Neil, do you have any?
Just to say again, I think one of the key areas for the which the outworkings of this PAC report will be very relevant for us is around the monitoring one, about what level of detail we're working through that at the moment. As I say, not trying to duplicate, but this will provide the monitoring and assurance around the ISNI when agreed, and we're looking into what level of detail of data we're going to report on, how we're going to monitor that. So again, the recommendations that I'm sure you will have will be relevant for us in that regard. Conscious again of not duplicating or repeating work, we're trying to make sure we've one data system, one that SROs can directly enter data into. SIB are helping design that for us, so there shouldn't be duplication of effort against what departments are collecting as well, so that it doesn't become another bureaucratic process. But that number 6, monitoring and assurance, is clearly something I'm sure the committee will have thoughts on as to what data you would expect to see in that future monitoring report, indeed, if that was being made available.
Just to pick up before I come on to the next area, which is social licences, going to be picked up by Colin Gildernew. You've said a lot about improving and projects in terms of milestones, turning to green lights. When can people in the street, ordinary people in our society, expect to see the benefit of these improvements? And further, that if you could pick one project now as an example for this committee, could you pick one and outline what improvements have been made?
When I think of the changes that we have put in place, some of these do not come with an immediate response, because some of these are deep and structural in identifying the areas that we need to focus on. I think towards the structures that have been put in place, for me one of the key areas is the understanding of the social licence aspect. And actually the understanding that needs to be a fundamental aspect that's underpinned as part of those projects. We will discuss that later. We're looking towards the projects that have come in that we have identified that are red flags to the next board, and we will be doing a deep dive in terms of where that progress needs to be better, or there's lessons learned.
It just worries me, just sorry for interrupting, you've both talked about how improvements have been made. That there's a number of projects that have green lights in them, but I've just asked a very simple question to outline one project and explain the improvements that have been made by all of these adjustments that are now in place, and you aren't able to do that. Improvements on paper are not improvements if they're not tangible. So it's a bit worrying if you can't explain how all these changes have led to an improvement in any particular project.
Well, respectfully, my answer to that would be we've only had a committee for a year. We haven't even got the monitoring data yet, so projects are quite a long run.
This isn't a new problem. There's been a long tail of issues here in terms of delays, overspends and everything else. Surely you weren't waiting just for the return of the executive a year ago to have all these things in place. I would like to think there was some forward planning in relation to.
And absolutely, in terms of the recommendations this committee provided, was to provide experienced non-execs. That went ahead and was delivered in the absence of an executive. It was my view and the view of my colleagues that actually that wasn't sufficient. Just to deliver that requirement wasn't sufficient, because we wouldn't have the scrutiny over actually what was the things underpinning this. And it's not about, of course, there's multiple specific projects, but we need to understand what are the root causes of those things going wrong.
I've no doubt about that, and you have been very, very good at giving us all of the examples of how it's improved, but you can't explain to me how we can see any tangible improvement that is going to be picked up on the ground by the taxpayers and the ratepayers of our community who are paying for these delays. So that's why I'm asking the question. It's okay talking about improvements, but no one outside of the door being able to see the benefit of them. So I'm asking, at what point, if you can't provide an example now, at what point will the people that we represent in our constituencies that are they're paying for these overruns significantly, going to see a tangible benefit?
Well, we're obviously here to listen to those aspects as well. The nature of the capital projects is that establishing a committee and a structure isn't going to address those areas in the immediate term in terms of a tangible response. There are multiple projects that are under delivery. We are underpinning what the kind of key aspects are that we need to drive forward, but that will take time, Chair, in terms of showing the outworkings. And I guess also it is very difficult to identify where things that might have happened haven't happened in a retrospective perspective. So, we always need to provide further improvement and enhancement, but actually what action has been taken that has stopped things happening is a very difficult reverse argument to prove. I guess also to look towards those cost areas and the difference of the budgets. Some of the areas is actually how we monitor that outset. So of the 3 billion we talked about, it's an outline business case. It's not the final business case, which represents when you've gone through planning and procurement. There is a 10% overrun. So sometimes the money is what was on paper, but actually the establishment of what that actually outturn isn't based on the real perspective of when a project was costed, and it only gets costed at final business case. That outturn difference is around 10%. But absolutely, there are key aspects that need to be driven. Planning, social licensing being key areas of delivery that need to be focused on. We are endeavouring with everything that we're doing, and beyond what in creating structures, whilst we had no executive as well, to actually drive forward. So we are not waiting for direction but we will also take learnings from this review of this committee of what we need to factor in to do better and to do more of as well.
I would say just a small remark as well. There's a lot of brilliant work being done by a lot of brilliant people delivering capital projects. Understandably, our focus is in the ones that overrun, and that's what we scrutinise, and we look at high-risk projects. A lot of the brilliant work you wouldn't necessarily see unless you were in one of those capital delivering departments, and hopefully our citizens are seeing the benefits of a lot of that capital investment at the minute, because what we don't want to do is create a system that's so fearful it won't develop projects for fear of, well, the world will change when it happens. I spent a lot of time talking to colleagues around the procurement side, and our nearest neighbours in Ireland or UK have, I don't have a comparable report to put to it, but you could all pick the projects out who have the similar capital overruns on hospitals, on transport networks in other jurisdictions, war in Ukraine, inflation, there's lots of reasons, but actually there are many projects being delivered and delivered well. We had the privilege of being in the new Grand Central, cost overruns. I can't speak to those, not my department. However, sitting in it was a privilege in terms of looking at what a facility this place now has, and you would want to think that speaks to what we can do on the capital side.
Yes, it's one example and it's a positive one, but there's also many that are not so positive and are not to be proud of in any way, shape or form. Our role is to ensure good value for public money, and there's major problems, as you are well aware, that needs to be resolved. If we can't see a tangible benefit to the changes that you have now outlined to this committee, then what is the point? And secondly, it's okay talking about traffic lights and all of the internal lingo that goes with these processes, but this is about what the public see and what their benefit is for the well-invested taxes that they pay. So we really need to be clear about what we expect when it comes to outcomes. It's okay having traffic lights with no cars on the road. The traffic lights aren't much good, are they? So there's issues here. When we undoubtedly review this again, I would like to hear of an example, a tangible example of how these changes have actually led to a benefit and not just wasted time. Otherwise, this is a waste of time.
Sorry, Chair, if I may respond. Yeah. I'm acutely aware this is about the people that we serve and making a tangible benefit, and being in Grand Central, being in Ulster University and massive from in areas where there has been deprivation, the regeneration effect that has had, the fire and ambulance service in the centre, it's been developed, and they make tangible differences, and that is why we are so focused in trying to understand the areas that we can make difference. I guess when you talk about the kind of the traffic lights, those need to be based not on anecdotal information. They need to be grounded on actually what did go wrong, and then when we report them, they need to be based on real data, real-time data, and consistent across all these projects. Because you, I'm sure, like me, can get swords of information which actually tells you very little in terms of interrogating that information, and there'll always be a reason and errors. So we need to understand what are the core things that are keeping happening again and again, which is the enabling actions, and what is the reasonable set of data that we need to hold account to those. Now, some of them may be to do with kind of things outside the control, but some of them won't be. And I guess it's that data and evidence base, and then we need a structure to hold to account and a mechanism. Now, we are at the foothills of that, and I have to be honest, and there is more we could and I probably should have done, but actually that is what we are endeavouring to do, because it matters to people, it matters to the economy, and it matters to all the lost opportunities that are there as well.
I can feel many of my permanent secretary colleagues shouting in my ears, telling me what project I should cite. Obviously, DOF doesn't deliver a lot of capital projects, but it would be disingenuous as well for me to say that even the ones we've referenced, that the committee, I mean, it's not been there that long. Our new structures, it will take time, and most of the reasons for those successes are for very brilliant, excellent people, for which I certainly wouldn't want our committee structures or myself to take any credit for. But what we can do is make sure they feel encouraged, supported, that we learn the lessons from the good as well as the bad. And that's why we went, for example, as a board there to see, so they could tell the story to us about how they'd made progress, give them all a little bit of a lift, and then think, okay, is there any lessons from that we can take forward? So there would be colleagues of mine who deliver a lot more capital would be itching with a number of examples, but I think it would be wrong for me to try and trace any claim back to a fledgling committee and a process. And hopefully when you look back again in years to come, it will also be clearer and easier to evidence where that progress has been.
Thank you, and thank you. Appreciate the answers and engagement. And I have to say, I welcome the fact that social licence has indeed been peppered throughout and that's to be welcomed. However, I still retain a wee element of concern, which I'm going to try to dig into now. And in that sense, I'm going to slightly switch the order in which I'm asking the questions. I'm going to ask the second question first, the first question second, and I'm sure you'll be delighted to know the third one will still be third.
I've written that down.
So, I suppose the first one, I'm concerned that the two are getting, social value is getting conflated a bit with social licence. They're very different things. Yeah. So what is your understanding of the difference between social licence and social value?
Yeah, it's really important difference, because we have a method of social value is something you can contract for, you can measure, you can codify, you can quantify, and we do have social value within contracting and ways of measuring that. But social licence is something very different, as you know, and something that's almost more. It's about permissions. It's about collaboration in the fullest sense. It's more like a philosophy than a policy in the way social value would be. Social value is within it, but actually social licence is something very different. It's about the reason it's been peppered in a little bit is it's certainly been one of the things that's most I've certainly learnt more about as I've gone along. When you're involved in public service, you can think about what you do in consultation, and that's not what social licence is. It's a much more engaged programme. It must start very, very early in terms of talking to the communities, talking to the people for whom any investment will impact, and see what they would hope and wish from it. It doesn't solve all. When we look at the evidence from elsewhere, and I point members again to the SIB report, very helpful in this regard. So impacted by it was I brought Brett and his team along to my own departmental board to take us through the whole concept and help teach, many of myself and my colleagues more about it. And it really is a very different thing to how I'd conceived it about running consultations and engaging with communities. Very different thing, thinking about being involved right at the outset. Looking at the evidence from elsewhere where it's done well, France or Canada, they still run into challenges, as you would expect. It's the right and democratic process. But you do have a very a smoother journey, and it's something that it'll take a long time for us to see the real benefit. But one of the big changes we've made is to put into the new PPN 21 coming, which will come into effect with the new Procurement Act at the end of February. That makes a requirement of a social licence stream within any major capital project. So that's requiring that to be done. But we've quite a lot of learning on it. To be frank, we have to learn from those areas that have done it well and better than us. And we also have to develop training in terms of who will run that type of social engagement. So, for example, they have institutes that do that in France. So we're at the foothills of getting it right. But it is. I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to speak on it, because it is a very different thing to a social value contract.
So, and I suppose the importance of it is on the A5, for example, social licence has been established by default almost, rather than design, and that the difference between design and default is delay, and all of what has unfolded. Within the SAB's own, how do we do it? How do we do social value? Social value is 1 point, there's 4 bullets. Social value is 1 point out of 5 in the first bullet. So it's really 1/5 of 25%. So social value is hugely important, but a very small part of it. It's a much, much bigger thing. And I would be keen to ensure that accounting officers and anyone responsible through that chain understands that. I'm concerned that people will think if we can demonstrate social value, that will do us for social licence. It's only a tiny part of it. So how are you going to ensure, and I take it it's a journey where we can't just create it overnight, but how are you going to ensure that the understanding of the breadth of it and the importance of it is right there throughout the entire process?
Well, a couple of ways that we'll do that. One, and I'm sure this committee will make recommendations in that regard, which is always helpful, things that we can tie back to and say it's also a requirement of the committee. We've put it into the PPN, the new, which is coming shortly. But also we're already looking at how will we train our SROs, how will we train our teams to be able to develop better on it, what external expertise will we need to help us. We'll be looking at bringing people over in terms of coaching and training. But it's also a training for the community groups and for others who would have to engage with us in a different way as well. So it'll be I'm not underestimating the significance, and probably the best way, although I'm speculating a little, the likelihood is being able to anchor that into some of our projects that are really in the conceptual stages at this point in time. And we do look at some areas where it's been done well, but maybe not under that badge. So there is good practice, even locally. But I think we have to see it as a journey of change, not just in learning for us as a service administering social licence, but for those who'll be impacted by it, so that the citizens, community groups feel that they're being treated and engaged with in a different way. And I think that's quite a body of learning. And we have a enabling action around that, and we'll be developing our plan, which we'll be obviously happy to share around that.
Well, just let me say this then by way of a comment. I think the way it's presented within this PPN is slightly problematic in that we set out social value, then we mentioned the new name the new name for that social value. Right at the end of that, we mentioned social licence, and it's in brackets. And presentationally, that to me almost immediately downgrades it as something that's within social value rather than vice versa. So I think there's a need to bring it up even just presentationally, so it's higher on the radar in a sense.
That's very helpful, thank you.
So I think that's something that we need to ensure, because I think it could continue to get conflated to a point where we find out 5 years' time it hasn't been fully ingrained. So it's important in that sense. The final thing is then, you've said there's some examples of good practice. I'm delighted you said that, because that is number 3 question is, could you give us some examples where you have seen, mightn't have been called social licence, where that type of effective approach has led to a good outcome in delivering a project?
There are a few, and obviously I'm not as close to them as the departments that would be in charge of them, but for example, thinking through the journey that, because I worked there for part of it in Ulster University, is a very good example of the engagement with local communities there to think about what regeneration efforts that could bring. But why I pick that out as a story is it shows you that with a social licence journey, it continues after the project is developed too. So even today, looking at road networks and looking at safety, there's still a lot of issues continuing to engage. So it's not something you do just to get your project done. It's to build a relationship between that capital project and that area. And I think that's one good example where those networks continue, the engagement with local business owners and local residents continues. Again, not without its challenges, but a hugely important regeneration project that almost built up that social licence as it went on. But why I like it as an example is the fact that it's still going on as a process, even though the project's gone.
And good engagement will always be a process and not an event, and that is significant.
I'd like just to come into reflection, because I think the social licence is a really good example, but of something that's kind of more fundamental. And I think we're in the Senate chamber, and I was in here before, and young people leaving, when we were developing the engagement developing the Advances Women and Girls framework. And I think that nature of the consultation period is actually not what we should be moving to. It should be at the beginning and the co-design. And I think there's an element of, if you look through from a social licence, it could almost be transactional, because you want to get this done, and this is, you have to engage with kind of community. But actually that's fundamentally not. You will get a richer, broader proposition. And we talked here about breaking down silos and accountability in the civil service. That's also about how we work ingrained, with the people closer to the ground. We're kind of been engaged in the storm response and all the groups. And it's the people, the community voluntary sector, who know the sectors and everything else. And I think it's a much more fundamental aspect as we go towards, kind of policies, programme for government, isn't it, is actually being there and having those voices at the earliest century, because it gives a better policy development, as well as there is outworkings for not doing that as well.
One of the biggest cultural changes is that willingness to engage so early that maybe the idea is not fully formed or baked, and that's culturally very different to what you're used to doing, which is design what you're going to do and then take it out and consult on it. Whereas if you're saying, I think we need to resolve a transport solution here, but we're not exactly sure what it might look like yet. That takes a different level of sort of bravery and openness about your ideas that the final product mightn't look anything like that. And that's the sort of type of behavioural change I think we need to have, as well as just putting it into legislation.
And I think the reference to bravery is important in that I think the system sees that as a huge challenge. We're exposing ourselves to all of this churn and change, and it's not as controlled as we are maybe used to. But actually, there's real value in it. You could pay thousands and millions to consultancy firms when people in communities or in particular areas will have the understanding of the difficulties and often the solutions, and they're prepared to give them to you virtually for free. And that should be an inherent part of all the processes. I would have liked one under ISNI projects, but I'd be expecting the next time we come back, we'll be definitely seeing something in black and white around social licence in ISNI projects and how it's hardwired in there and across other departments.
Thank you. We appreciate that we're running over time, but we have a number of questions, Neil, in relation to the RHI implementation and outstanding inquiry recommendations, so we're going to touch on a few of those. So, if that's okay. Just one, in a letter to you dated on the 24th of October, you were asked whether there was a plan in place with defined timescales to ensure that the remaining inquiry recommendations are fully addressed. And in the response received by this committee on the 6th of November, you stated that officials would be shortly putting advice to the Minister on how best to make progress on that particular matter. Given that we're now 2 months on, can you give advice on whether this has happened, and is there now a plan in place with defined timescales for the implementation?
Yes, the advice has been provided by myself and my officials to the Minister to consider for her feedback, thoughts, and then hopefully onward to the Executive. So yes, that advice is now in, and I'm confident that if accepted in its current guise, I'm hopeful that will give us a plan to complete all of those actions that will be agreeable with the NIAO.
Okay, and just in relation to the plan overall, and based on that plan, what date do you expect all outstanding recommendations to be fully implemented?
I can't say that yet, because some of the things that we've recommended require the Minister to decide whether she would take a particular approach to, and then obviously the timeline will follow from whatever particular decision that she takes in terms of the recommendations. So some of them around policy areas and things will take quite significant time, others can be done a little bit more quickly. I think one of the key things in some of the RHI follow-up findings was some challenge for us in getting things that would be auditable. In other words, that the NIO would be content. They weren't unhappy that we hadn't made the actions, but we couldn't measure them in the way that they'd hoped for. So we're very hopeful that this plan, which as I say is with the Minister, will hopefully lead to a roadmap to complete the last of the recommendations. Some of them, I would say, Chair, to be fair, we'd have probably wanted to be going further now, and they'll find their home in other things like our people plan, for example, and strategy. So we're hoping to both be able to close off those recommendations, but also take the spirit and the ethos of some of them. The world's obviously moved on a little bit, and take what sorry, it's a bad phrase to use, but what we expect is you would think if you were writing that today. So we're not narrowly focusing and just saying close that for the sake of closing it. We're hoping that some of the recommendations we make to bring those into constant review in a new strategy forum, like for example the people strategy that's under development, will hopefully give them a little bit even more than what was originally set out in the RHI report.
And when you receive those timescales, you'll update us?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, yep. Thank you. Padraig Delargate.
Anton mute himself, I think.
Broadcaster just going to sort him out now.
Broadcasters are sorting out.
There's the mic on.
Yeah, hopefully that's a couple of times today. I think I've had difficulty, but hopefully you can hear me now, is it?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Thanks very much. Well, look, thank you for your presentation and your answers so far as well. And I know that I want to touch on kind of root cause analysis, and I appreciate that that's been peppered through a lot of your answers, so you may be covering some ground. But just in terms of that, SAB have completed the review. Obviously now, can you talk us through the main findings, and then importantly, I suppose, what needs to change in that as well?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Delargy. In the findings from the root cause analysis, they identified a number of the key areas we were under people, our processes, and then in terms of policy. So those form the 12 enabling actions, of which we have now identified owners for each of those, and those are now being monitored with action plans in the committee, and then further brought to the next board for governance. So the first two were regarding the infrastructure profession in itself and the plan for the public and private sector to support many of those areas, and that has been a theme that's obviously been raised by this committee, but also identifying with the relevant sectors. And we've engaged through some workshops in this regard. We worked with some of the top 6 ALBs, which represent 60% of the capital spend, to identify what the key areas they had in terms of recruiting external expertise and the HR policies. Under the process aspect is the business case process. Again, there was a workshop that was led as part of the ISNI committee. I think it was 105 attendees at that committee, looking towards what the common areas and issues that were identified through the business case process. And I guess some of it picks up on some of the themes that came up through that areas is that there was a view that was a focus more on the process rather than the outcomes, and I guess the lack of monitoring of the timelines for approval of those processes, and a need to make sure that that's more focused. Other areas included under process the planning system, both the short-term planning improvements, but also the long-term planning improvement plan, which is obviously under the direction of the Department for Infrastructure. Mountain insurance was also then included, and proportionate project management aspects of that. So that also looked towards then the data map, which again was to replace the other monitoring and reporting arrangements. A trial was done for that aspect on the City Deal, growth and City Deal projects, and it's a live database system that's been developed in NAC for agreement. That was agreed by next board to use this vehicle for both historic projects but as need projects going forward. Procurement, again, there was a meeting of SROs in terms of the integrated procurement plan. And then under policy, and I'm sure Neil will want to come into all of these in much more detail, but look towards the aspects of policy in terms of risk and guidance and proportionate for risk assessments, in particular the social licence aspects, funding and finance. The funding needs identified in ISNI far outweigh the funding that will be available. So looking towards how different funding structures can be addressed and how they might be financed. I think there's about 7 billion estimates for maintenance in itself as part of the procurement plan, but looking towards areas, and that could include access to different funds, but also different borrowing powers, for example, for the housing executive. There we are also looking towards the Scottish model. We had a meeting with the investor panel for Scotland a number of weeks ago to understand what they are doing. So we have that collective learning and indeed having some industry reference as part of that. Infrastructure planning was the 10th area identified, and that long-term infrastructure needs assessment, that 7 billion that you need for maintenance, and as well as the overall aspects. But I guess acknowledging if you're building a house or a new school, it needs the water infrastructure behind it. It needs the power infrastructure behind it. So how and the road infrastructure as well. Core areas in terms of decarbonisation are looking towards the changing legislatively and regulatory environment to reach our 80% of energy by 2030, and what may then indeed need legislative change within the confines that we're delivering. And then also then the last area was the working with the sectors to coordinate the adoption of those standards and qualifications. So that provided, I guess, a very brief summary. Neil can go into, and we agreed to provide the highlight reports for each of those that has been reported to the next board, which goes into who's the project lead, what are the project objectives, where the deliverables are for the different phases, the key activities that have been undertaken, the key activities for the next 2 months, updating the milestones and resourcing and risks, and also the status.
Can I just jump in and just between you there, if that's okay? Because I just think it's probably a better point for the next question. Just if you could touch on it. Just in terms of the recommendations which you've mentioned, have those been agreed by the next board? All of them? Yeah.
Yes, as Jane alluded there, each and all of those, we find that, or certainly I find that quite a profound and excellent report. All of the recommendations of that have been brought together with the recommendations from the NIAO reports and others into those enabling actions. So I would certainly encourage the committee to take a look at those recommendations and read that across to our enabling actions and highlight reports and check that you feel. But certainly I would be confident that the enabling actions cover all of those recommendations from that. And as I mentioned, it hasn't only been my department. We've brought in Brett and his team to present to my board because of the profound nature of some of the findings in that, and indeed some of the authors of that report remain involved through SIB on the work that we're doing now.
And we have a mapping, sorry.
No, go on ahead.
Sorry. And also we can provide the mapping that was provided to each of those enabling actions. For example, the one on the procurement process, there was 24 legacy recommendations which came out of the PAC, CBI. So there is a corollary between how all those are being delivered. So to give you, I guess, that assurance and indeed for your scrutiny to see whether you feel that they will be addressing those areas that were identified.
That's very useful. And just I'd be, I suppose, keen to get your assessment of whether you consider them to be robust, but also whether you consider them to be achievable. All those outcomes and actions.
Yeah, to the first point, yes, very much so. I think there were well evidenced, good research in there, so I think it would be hard to disagree with them. As to whether they be achieved, I mean, that's certainly the intention, but some of them are incredibly difficult, and if we look around the world, people are wrestling with the same challenges. You know, they talk about skills, and there's a finite supply of that skill set around the world. It's in high competition. We're a very small place. We have to train our own. We have to develop. So there are, I wouldn't underplay just how challenging it is anywhere in the world, never mind locally, to deliver capital projects effectively and efficiently. So I would be confident that we've put a framework in place to give us the best chance of doing it, but I wouldn't underestimate the challenge. There's, as we've discussed at this committee, it is a very difficult thing to do to deliver modern, flexible infrastructure to budget.
And also just to reference that some of these in the policy domain, policy is obviously not for officials, it's to provide advice, but some of them would require new legislation potentially to be adopted. I think the ability to deliver on our net zero commitments and our energy targets will be very challenging if we are continuing with the same structures because of the complexity of the propositions and the complexity of the challenges. So insofar as identifying the issue, I think that I am assured that we have identified the key areas, but actually the areas that we can bring effect to that are still within the kind of the confines of the global situation, but also the kind of the position that ministers have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And obviously some of them are more complex than others. I think it'd be really useful to get that breakdown of your assessment of which ones are achievable and which ones aren't, or not that they're not, but will be, I suppose, more difficult to achieve. Because obviously there needs to be a strategy put in place then in terms of short, medium and long-term goals to assist you in achieving those, and also what blockages, and I appreciate there are some similarities and some that are run across the board, but there are some which are going to be novel to each project and to each situation. So I think just in terms of our knowledge, it would be really useful to get that information so that we can see, I mean, obviously we had worked, Philip and I from our party had worked on the Hawks around green energy and climate change, and it's so cross-cutting that really it's going to be very difficult to try and, I suppose, balance all that, measure all that. So I know you've touched on that one in particular, but I think if we were able to get in at the early stage now and actually identify where the potential pitfalls are, then we might be more likely to actually achieve that by putting those short-term strategies in place to build towards that. So I agree with you on that point, certainly. Just the last point for me on this, because I'm conscious just of time moving on as well. There are numerous reports that have highlighted I suppose, the fundamental reforms which are needed. In terms of those root causes that you've identified and that we've talked about here today, what are the short-term measures which you can put in place to address those?
So I think to qualify in terms of the enabling actions themselves, some of them don't come with an overall programme plan as this is the end game, because actually some of those is actually the discovery phase, because we need to consult with all the ALBs to unpick the issues. So that's the thematic area that we know we have issues in terms of our skilled workforce, and that we need to engage with our ALBs to understand the skills and sets they have provided. I think there's real areas, particularly in the fact that we had such a large representation in the business planning perspective, that there's a clear areas that we need to address in terms of that not progressing and not working. I know there has been short-term responses which will be reflected in the accounting officer provisions. So Neil, I don't know whether you have any.
Yeah, I think to that, as I said, we'll send on the highlight report from the board just passed this week, and that'll set out some of the update on milestones, which will reflect some of the things that we can be done relatively or are scheduled to come in the short term. Some of them, as you've identified, are clearly very long term around some of the skills requirements and things, but there are small, and I would point to things like the new social procurement policy note. I would also point to things like the Procurement Act coming in. So there are some things that will come in that will allow us to accelerate some of these actions. I think for me, probably the most interesting of all will be the work stream on new reporting, which I think will probably be the most valuable in terms of early insights.
We've obviously done a lot of work around the skills piece, and I mean, I have a motion coming to the floor next week around skills, but I think sometimes the failure that we all collectively have in this is that we look at a big ticket issue like that and we go, oh, we're not sure how to solve it. But it's not. It's the failure to break it into smaller steps, which I appreciate you're doing, and that you are looking at those short, medium term and longer term actions. Because I mean, if we're to look at even the likes of skills, I mean, there's careers advice has to come before that, but before careers advice has to come a review of the sixth form funding model, because schools are, there's a financial imperative on schools to retain students. So you're not going to be able to challenge the career service until you change that funding model, and you're not going to be able to challenge the skills deficit until you change the career service model. So there are a number of steps in all these things, and I think the more information that you can provide on that, I appreciate you've brought it forward this week. I think that's really useful in helping us to be supportive of your role, and actually to look going forward at what we can do to have those smaller strategies which feed into a broader strategy. I think that's the key here, and I appreciate you're already working on that. So that's all for me. Thanks very much.
Maybe I think I give one example of those smaller aspects where you can show, because sometimes it can be just perhaps look overwhelming or too complicated. But Department for Infrastructure, in terms of needing its technical, its infrastructure staff have implemented. It's a third of the type we've done within the civil service. There is skills academies which DFE delivered for FDIs coming to Northern Ireland, where we know we've got really talented individuals but don't have the skills match for what's needed, so they reskilled them into areas like data science and software. DFI are running academy based on the infrastructure skill sets, and that's acknowledging that we have talent, but perhaps not the skills. So running through that, and that's with Belfast Met. And I think those are the models that we can, we developed it in the service. We delivered it really well externally. It's been part of our success in the economy, but actually how we think differently about doing those. And I think those are, I guess, the collective where you're getting all those SRRs together, how you can actually scale that into different areas and regions too.
Okay, Peter. Yeah, you've been silenced before you went silent. So, that's fine. Thank you, David.
Okay. Just back to RHI. Just look at the documentation and around that, and the Department of Finance nominated as the board to support the executive subcommittee and oversee that. But given the fact that the information management was highlighted in the inquiry report significant failing, it would not be reasonable to expect that there was a readily available file of evidence held by the Department of Finance to support its own assessment.
Yeah, I mean, I take responsibility for that in the sense that we have, it's been a very difficult job, but I would say for me to try and keep my department within budget. And that's meant we've had lots of vacancies not filled, pressures that you'd be familiar across the system. So we have a very, very thin corporate services function. And because a lot of the material does sit in other departments, we have to collect it. So, for example, the policy profession work, the head of policy profession isn't in the Department of Finance. So we still had to go out to collect it from others. And I absolutely take responsibility for the fact that we don't really have the resource and the machinery to pick that up perhaps as quickly as the NIAO had hoped that we would have had. We had been providing regular updates on our RHI progress, but what obviously the follow-up correspondence revealed was some of the material that we had wasn't of the level of detail that the NIAO would have expected. So we didn't have it all to hand. We had to collect it from other departments, and it was regrettably slower than others had. But to your question, no, we didn't have auditable material all sitting there. Different, although we're the coordinating body, different areas and we would have checked in annually and collected information from them, but we didn't all have it to hand. I accept that criticism.
Maybe if I sorry, Mr. Hunt. On the records management, there were 3 areas that were identified in the RHI. 2 of those were achieved. The third is towards the audit, if the information has been provided. There were issues that were found also in terms of the COVID inquiry and areas that we identified and took action for afterwards. Through that, we introduced mandatory record management online training for all civil servants. We also reconstituted the SARO, the Information Governance Board, and we had a new framework which has been rolled out within departments. I met with the Information Commissioner as well in terms of that approach and strategy. But I think in terms of my understanding of the aspects of non-delivery, the record keeping is required under the accounting officer provision, so it would be, and it is audited by departments in terms of their record management. Any internal audit will also identify those areas. The issue that we had was that thematic review across the service, and as Neil said, kind of the prioritisation of those areas you do thematic reviews on. After the RHI review, kind of as we look towards those prioritisation of reviews, raised that it was a raising a concern because we had issues there as well, and that thematic review has taken place. But I guess to give you kind of assurances that we are fully committed to having delivered it, but also to having the auditable material available to the audit office to make sure we're assured of. And I think that's some of the other gaps between the other 5 that said that weren't available. It was actually the audit of the information to be able to vouch that.
Can I just clarify one thing? Has there been a re-establishment of the executive subgroup?
No, there hasn't.
Okay. What is the advice from yourselves to the executive then for that?
I have the advice with the Minister at the minute, so it's obviously for the Minister to consider, so that's policy and development, if you will, so I can't tell you what's in that advice yet, but once she's content with that or whatever changes she wants, she will take that to the executive, and then we'll make that available, of course, to the committee.
Okay, so this is the Minister that has stopped the subcommittee reform?
No, we've provided advice. I have provided advice as to how to meet the recommendations that are set out as not being completed, and I've provided advice around those matters, and it'll be for the Minister to consider that advice.
But I think the executive subcommittee, and was prior to me taking up the post, it had fulfilled its terms of reference for the committee when the recommendations were agreed, and it was then for this committee to monitor the delivery of those recommendations. In the absence of having committees, I actioned updates to the next board of where we were in terms of the RHI recommendations, the last of those being I think last January, in advance, and obviously hoping for the restoration of the executive. I think they were presented in March. It was our view we had fulfilled the actual requirements, but obviously we didn't have the vouching information there, and that's why it's obviously really helpful to deliver that. So I guess executive committee wasn't stood down; it had fulfilled those terms to stand up.
There's
again.
No plans for it to be re-established.
It'll be for the Minister to consider the advice.
Okay, a couple other things because you just pricked me. So. There was an allegation in the paper just pre-Christmas, and an article, and it basically said along the lines that the civil service doesn't believe it needs to do as orders direct. How do you respond to an allegation like that?
Sorry, what was it? Repeat again?
There was an allegation in the paper around RHI that the civil service doesn't believe that it needs to do as auditors direct. How would you respond to that?
I would say that's untrue.
Right, okay, no problem. And then finally, can you confirm that you're committed to the full implementation of recommendation 4 of the report, of the NAO report, which proposes measures placed in the Department of Finance to ensure that appropriate documentation and records are published and are held centrally by DOF and are made available timely whenever we want to inspect?
Again, advice with Minister, but certainly in terms of the overarching comment about record keeping remains important. As Jane has said, we've reconstituted the CSIRO Forum. They're bringing an annual report. We're looking at changing our content management systems for record keeping. It's actually a really challenging question now globally about what you consider. Obviously, technology allows you to record a lot more now, but the question is all of that? We're adding about 1 million records a month to the content manager system, which is becoming almost impossible to navigate when you try to find records then. So it's not obvious that just recording all in every conversation will actually be the right outcome that we're looking for in terms of better clarity of record keeping. So there's a review going on at the minute of all our record keeping policies to make sure they're up to date and as best practice as they can be, and that's coming to our next board in, I think it's May, but it might be the month after.
There is a commitment to have that information available when the auditor wants that information.
Yeah, obviously there's a resource commitment for us to do that, and we've limited resources, so we do our very best to make sure we have everything as quickly. My contention would be we'll hopefully have it as quick as it's required, but whether it takes us a little bit longer to collect some of that is less, to me, isn't as pressing as making sure we actually have it and get it. And
I would also just reference as technology progresses, so since the RHI and those areas we've rolled out Microsoft Office 365 to everyone, to 28,000 across the service. There's a mechanism where we have looked back to you make sure that you comply and you have to do things. Technology should take that away. It should not allow you. It should remove the ability not to do the right thing, and that information should be there. That the things we talked about, that data map, that actually it's built into the system, so it should be queryable, as opposed to sending lists of assurances to assure me that you've done this and this and this. The technology should allow to the guardrails that actually nothing else can be provided on the mobile devices that we have. That's in a locked-down environment where everything is captured and retained. At the moment, we have timeline rules where you have to put things in systems. That should remove that, because actually we need to drive better transformations in terms of productivity across the service, and we need to embrace technology in a way that helps us deliver that productivity, but also stops us in optimizing in terms of that function of government. So I guess that's part of the CSIRO Forum, is actually how do we look back to do that, but as Neil said, what are the big opportunities going forward that we can actually provide better assurances, but also that you can come in and query that using technology as opposed to sending people out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. CNAG, have you any comments? No? Okay. Sure? Okay. Thank you both for being with us and taking questions for quite a prolonged period of time. Even on the RHA questions, we've got information today that really could have been provided or furnished to us in written form, and had it have been so, we wouldn't have asked some of those questions today or had to raise them. So I think really the lesson here is if we ask questions and we need answers, then we should receive that information as requested and in a timely fashion. Not wait for 3 months in some instances for information and not have questions left unanswered, which we're left then to follow up, which is taking up your time as well as ours. But that said, I do appreciate you being with us, for taking questions, for answering to the best of your ability, and if we do require any further information, I'd be very appreciative if you would commit to providing us with those answers as quickly as possible and as in much detail as is possible. But thank you both for being with us, and it is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks also to Stuart and Julie from the Treasury Officer of Accounts, and of course to Darina, our Controller and Auditor General, and the staff in the Northern Audit Office for their assistance, and our guests in the gallery are also very welcome as well. So thank you. Members, we'll now move to closed session.
Senate chamber. Sound. 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 Senate chamber. sound, Senate chamber, 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 sound. 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 Senate chamber. 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 Sound.
Sorry we've dragged on, but there's been a lot today. I wanted to give those who youth assembly a bit of time. So, okay. All right. Okay. So we're back in open session, and members, we have had a very interesting session today, and there'll be a number of recommendations forthcoming as a result of that evidence and others. So thanks very much for your questions to our witnesses. Members, under agenda item 7, we have at page 3 of the table pack is a draft letter to the statutory committee chairs following the session on primacy at last week's meeting. Are you content to approve and issue this letter along with the guidance provided by Frank Geddes at the meeting? Okay. And agenda item 8 corresponds to pages 108 of the pack as a letter sent to the Northern Ireland Audit Office and copied to the chair from Save Our Acute Services. Members, are you content to note that correspondence? Okay. And that leaves us any other business, members? No?
Chair, just to record a few agreements, the committee did agree the forward work programme in closed session, so that just needs to be noted. And did the committee want to talk any more about an action on an agreed letter in open session, just so that that can go in the minute as well?
Okay, so I think there's been a number of suggestions in terms of follow-up from today's session. So, Kirsten, are you clear on what the letter is? Do you want to outline it to the...
Yes, so...
Chair, it might just be useful to bring a draft letter back
for
members to sign off on next week. And that way, as has been pointed out, all members can see it, all members are clear on what's happening. And that just might be the easiest thing to do.
Okay, members content?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other business? Okay, goes without saying, thanks very much again to Dorina and the team for assisting us with this very important inquiry. Today's evidence session was of great interest and equally in measure great frustration. And I appreciate members for sticking with it today. I also want to thank Peter for being with us as our clerk today and stepping in for Lucia, and also Kirsten and Barbara for looking after us, and Marie. So thanks very much for that. So with that said, members, can I advise the next meeting is on Thursday, the 6th of February 2025 at 2 o'clock in the Senate chamber. And as agreed, there'll be no meeting on the 13th of February, and we'll reconvene the week following. So with that said, the meeting is now adjourned. Okay.
Senate chamber. Sound. 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 Senate chamber.